call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, April 21st, 2016. The time is 7 o'clock. Please call the roll.
President Self.
Here.
Trustee Valerie.
Here.
Trustee Collins. Here. Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Trustee Suddaby.
Here.
Trustee Hamilton.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Molina.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Haley.
We have a quorum. If you please join us for the pledge. Thank you, and welcome to everyone who's here with us tonight and everybody who's watching at home. If you would like to make a comment to the board at any point this evening, I just ask that you be recognized by the president and that you make your comments from the podium. Please state your name and your address so that everybody at home can hear and see what you have to say. First up this evening are presentations and public comment. We have a special honor tonight by Chief Weitzel for Officer Carl Bassick. Chief Weitzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that Carl Bassick come up. Mr. President, trustees, and Manager Francis, it's really my honor tonight to honor one of our police auxiliary officers who is retiring, or actually who has retired. And it was quite an effort for me to get Carl to come here, not because he didn't want to, because he doesn't want to seem that he did anything special. But any resident that volunteers 19 years of their talent to any of our organizations in the village, let alone the police auxiliaries, he has a full-time job. I convinced him that I would like to honor him for his years of service, his volunteer service, and to make sure that our president, board, and manager know that we have talented residents, which I know you do, that volunteer countless hours. Now, Carl was hired back in 96, 97 under my predecessor, Gene Karczewski. He spent, like I said, he's been an auxiliary officer for 19 years. He served as the quartermaster for the auxiliary, which is basically somebody who gets uniforms and does a lot of the behind-the-scenes work, is what Carl likes to do. That's why he didn't want to come here tonight, to be honored. He also, back when the auxiliary had ranks such as president, vice president, treasurer, he served in all those positions. He was president of the auxiliary corps at one time. He also held different ranks when the auxiliary corps had ranks. They in the mid-2000s got rid of the ranks and just went to the members assisting the officers. I personally rode with Carl when I was a patrolman and sergeant. They used to ride almost exclusively on Friday and Saturday nights with the full-timer. And sometimes we would have two auxiliary officers with us. You've seen him around. He's worked at the 4th of July. He's worked raw. He's assisted the police officers. He's rode with the police officers. He's worked during the floods. He's come in the flood situations from his own job to assist the village and assist the police department over the years in such things as crowd control, traffic control, and just assisting the officers on whatever duties they would have. So I asked him to come tonight. My liaison from the police department, Officer Michael Panic, is here. He's the liaison to the auxiliary corps. There are several other auxiliary members here. I'll have Carl introduce the other members when he comes up, because I'm going to ask Carl to address the board, because he's been a very honorable person, and it's not common that we get residents that volunteer their time for 19 years, and in Carl's case, they have to go through training. Now, he has to firearms train. They have to go firearms training to begin with. They have to get certified when he got hired. They have to go through that every year. There's other mandated training that they give up. They give up weekends, and they don't get paid a dime. And at times, they're put in very violent situations because they're riding right next to the full-time officers. They're not in their own vehicle. They're with my full-time personnel. So with that, for now, I have a presentation to give to Carl, but I'd like him to address the board first, and then I will come back to the podium and make a presentation.
First, to introduce the auxiliary officers, we have the current president of the Auxiliary Corps is Carl Choate, and Bill Shabilsky, who's actually a second generation auxiliary member. His father spent 30 years, 25, many, many years. So certainly far eclipsed me. But I would like to thank you, Chief Weitzel, President Sells, trustees, and fellow Riverside residents for this, for asking me to come. As the chief related, when he accepted my request for retirement, he said he'd like to present me with some sort of award. And my first reaction was that I should thank him and politely refuse, because really I've done nothing special, and certainly nothing that auxiliary members haven't been doing for nearly 75 years. After meeting with the chief, I still feel that I haven't done anything special, but I would like to take this opportunity to honor all of the scores of Riverside Auxiliary police officers who have all volunteered their time in the past and the present. My family moved to Riverside when I was 7 years old, and almost immediately we began to meet members of the Riverside Auxiliary Police, village business owners, family friends, parents of my schoolmates. Auxiliary members were a diverse group. Our neighbor, Mr. Merrill Norris, was a founder and the first captain of the Auxiliary Police, and of course I knew him well, living right across the street. He founded the Corps in 1942, originally as a civil defense unit under the village board, and their primary purpose at that time was the protection of the CB&Q Railroad and its bridge over the Des Plaines River to prevent any possible sabotage. Chicago is a huge manufacturing center and a national rail hub, and with the Burlington Railroad being a major route through the region, during the war, hundreds of tons of vital war material passed through Riverside every single day. So it was a really important thing to keep the trains running. After the war, the village decided to retain the group and recast it as a more general adjunct to the police department to provide a source of extra help for the department during large community events and gatherings, floods, and emergencies. Volunteerism was strong among the World War II generation, as we can all recall. And in fact, the Riverside Fire Department was still an all-volunteer group then. There were no full-timers, as it had been since inception in the 1870s. The police auxiliary was well received, and the ranks were full with a waiting list for membership. We'd certainly like to have that situation today, but perhaps not. I relate this to you not as a history lesson, but to explain why I chose to join the Riverside Auxiliary Police Corps so many years ago. Many of the people I looked up to as a boy had been auxiliary officers, and I was honored to be able to follow in their paths. Today, the Riverside Auxiliary Police continue to volunteer their time and help the village. There's no cost to the village itself, and the auxiliary officers do not receive pay. These village volunteers go quietly about their duties, each hoping to give something back to the village we all love. Auxiliary operating expenses such as uniforms and equipment are paid for by the generous contributions of Riverside residents during our periodic fund drives. Whenever you attend village gatherings such as the 4th of July parade or the Christmas walk, you'll see auxiliary members patrolling as well as helping with traffic and crowd control. Auxiliary officers are not village employees. They're your fellow Riverside taxpayers giving up their chance to participate in the event with their own families, instead volunteering to help you and your family enjoy the event and stay safe. Please, when you see any of these officers on duty or off, stop and thank them for being there to help. If you organize or run a village event, please don't forget to include the auxiliary as a thank you, as you thank those who contributed and volunteered for the event. That's their only pay, and I can assure you that a thank you is so deeply appreciated. To the village board, I'd like to suggest that next year, 2017, presents an excellent opportunity for the village to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the auxiliary police. As I mentioned, it was founded in 1942. Please consider some sort of Diamond Jubilee or other celebration to recognize the rich history of the organization and the scores of Riversiders who have volunteered their time to the auxiliary police since 1942. Each and every one of them has served, hoping to make Riverside just a bit better and safer. In closing, I'd like to thank you for this honor, for your kind attention to my remarks, and most of all, thank you to the village and the police department for the opportunity and honor of allowing me to participate in the auxiliary police for the last 19 years. I'll be sad to remove my uniform and star for the last time tonight. Thank you.
Carl, I'd like to present two. First is a certificate. I read it. It says the Riverside Police Department Recognition Award. This certificate is presented to Carl Vasek in recognition of Carl's years of volunteer service in the Riverside Police Auxiliary Corps, 1997 to 2016. It's signed by myself and my Deputy Chief, David Cole. Thank you. It's yours. And I also going to give Carl the Riverside Police Department patch, not the auxiliary patch. Because this is a wall hanging that I give out to people as either mementos or for people's years of service. But I'd like you to have this, and hopefully you'll display it proudly. And I want to say again that you're very humble, but your years of service to the residents of Riverside just speaks to the characters of citizens we have. You did a fantastic job, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I'll hold it. Did any of the trustees or president have any questions? If not,
I guess the only thing I would say, I hate to disagree with Officer Basic, but it is special what you've done for all these years, and all of you do to protect us, and we do appreciate it. And I'm glad that whenever I'm at an event, I often hear people stopping to say thank you to the auxiliaries because you perform a great service. And in my experience, the modest have always been the best. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
Next up, we have our 2015 annual report from the police department, and following that will be the 2015 mission report for the Wedge unit, both by Chief Weitzel. Chief Weitzel.
Mr. President, trustees, and Manager Francis, I have two reports. The annual report, I want to just briefly go over. Tomorrow, I will hopefully have it up on our village website, our annual report, and e-flash it out to the residents. I want to start out by saying that this entire report was prepared by my administrative assistant, Pamela McCall, who also likes to stay in the background. I asked her to come to be acknowledged tonight, and she said no. But she usually starts probably in about October of the previous year, gathering photos and statistical information and data, and probably finishes up about March, and then was able to put it together by April. She has officers submit information. She gets information from me, the court system, and then she puts it together. She tries to put it together in some format that's just not a bunch of numbers, so you would be completely bored by that. So I think she did a good job this year. And I'll go over maybe just some of the highlights inside the report. So crime overall is down 10%, obviously a good thing. It may even be down a little bit more. The state will verify our numbers in early July, and then the state will release their report, but it's usually within a percentage or so of the same report, of my report. There's a lot of community programs that are highlighted in here. One of the two programs that I get the most compliments on are Drive the Kids to School program. When they win those awards, they just love that. Showing up in front of the school with the lights and sirens and taking pictures has been a tremendous community event. And when we do the public speaking, wherever my officers do the crime prevention public speaking, I always get compliments from residents on the officers' knowledge of whatever they're speaking on, what topic. But I would have to say by far, I get most requests for the ride to school with the kids. And it's gone out, it's been a very successful program. We do it at least 4 to 6 times a year. There is a lot of activity. Last year in 2015, we did a lot of bike activity. We did a lot of bike patrol, which was newer because we got a grant to cover that whole bike patrol for the summer. So we had many more opportunities to ride the bikes. Our tobacco grant we received again, and the village was 100% compliant with the tobacco grant enforcement. The department made approximately just over 500 physical arrests. Now those are arrests for anything from people who have driving offenses all the way up to felony crimes, and they do include juvenile arrests. The department issued just under 4,900 total citations in 2015, that is parking and moving violations. 42% of those citations took place within the village boundary itself, meaning not Harlem, Ogden, 26th, or 1st Avenue. Another program that's been very successful is our child safety seat. We did 16 of those last year where residents came to the police department and had one of our certified officers install the seats for the parents. It's also done by the fire department. They also do the same program. The department had 4,869 911 calls last year, which was a lot. Just over 13,000 administrative phone calls. So we fell just short of 20,000 phone calls that the dispatchers take alone. And you have to remember our 911 operators handle the fire, paramedic, police, people that come in the window, and then the 911 calls and the administrative phone. We currently have one telecommunicator work every shift, and they do a great job. We had just over 15,000 calls for police service. Now that means that the resident called and wanted some type of police service. It's not all criminal activity, obviously. Some could be a lost dog. But there are calls that a police officer must respond to and do some type of action. So, we usually average anywhere between 13,000 and 16,000 calls for service on the high end. So we were right there. We made 129 DUI arrests last year. A majority of those drunk driving arrests, over 80% of them were on the midnight shift, which is common, and that would be common probably in every community. So and you'll see there's a section on the auxiliary. There's also a section on our explorers that do a wonderful job. The explorers work all of our community events. They also attend the national and state conference, and most of those explorers go on to be law enforcement officers. We have four explorers in the last 3 years that have left us, graduated from college, did our Explorer program, and now are full-time law enforcement officers in the state of Illinois. And we have one female that got hired by the Michigan State Police. Actually, that's 5. So I just wanted to go over this. If the trustees have any questions or the president, I'll be happy to answer them. I didn't want to hit everything because I will release it publicly. But if there's anything that you think you'd like me to speak on more, or anything that you looked at, I'll be happy to answer those.
Trustees?
On the DUI arrests, how many of those are Riverside residents? Any idea? Just ballpark.
Somewhere between like 10 and 12, very, very small amount. Most of them are not Riverside residents, and that's a typical every year after year.
How many of those are repeat offenders?
About 30%. So that means about, out of those 129, there's at least 30% of them are felony DUIs that we can't release them on bond. They go to court. And that's becoming more and more prevalent. Yes.
If I understood correctly, you said that the 911 calls were up significantly this
Yes.
year. Any reason for that? Are they being used properly, or are people calling 911 for
Yeah, that's a
things
little
they
bit
shouldn't?
well, they are being used properly. We're getting, if you looked at our 911 phone calls, if I broke it down, you would see that 66% of them are cell phones, because many residents don't even have hard lines anymore. So you'd see that 66% of the 911 calls, and more people are utilizing their cell phone to call 911. But we also get what's called bounce calls. So that cell tower you see at First and Forest by the high school, well, anybody that dials 911 that's in a radius of that tower comes to our facility. So you could be in Brookfield or parts of North Riverside or parts of Lyons, and if your phone is in proximity, the first tower it will hit, and then that'll automatically send it to us, and then we have to transfer it. So there's probably maybe 500 to 600 cell phone 911s that are actually intended for other communities that our dispatchers have to reroute.
I see.
Anything else? Thank you, Chief.
And then I'll briefly touch on the wedge report. The reason I present this to the president and board is because I serve as chairperson, and I think it's important that my board know what's going on. There's 10 communities involved in wedge. We've been in existence since 2006. The first chairperson was the former Berwyn Police Chief Bill Kushner, who's now the police chief in Des Plaines. It was his concept, and we just continued it when Bill accepted a new position in Des Plaines. I was put in as a chairperson, and they said I'd only be there a year, and I've been in there 5 years. So I continue to serve in that capacity, but it's a regional task force. It's meant part-time for gang and drug activity, and now we've been concentrating on long-term cases. We've been trying to do more building of conspiracy cases or larger cases, and not worrying about the street type of crime, because That's not conducive to Riverside, and it's really not conducive to some of the communities that are in there, but we really want to get at the source of these drugs and gang activity, so we try to do more prolonged investigations, which is represented in this report. But, so they basically work 4 days a month. They're a group of officers assigned by the chiefs of those 10 communities. They're led currently by the street commander for Wedge is Sergeant Guy Papa from Berwyn, who's an experienced supervisor. And he leads all the missions. So the sergeant's on the scene and he goes out and leads as many as 10 to 16 tactical officers, depending on how many are working those call-outs. But they go out with a mission. So they don't show up and they go out on patrol like you would notice a patrolman would do. They go out with a specific mission those days from intelligence they've gathered or citizens' complaints of drug activity and gang activity. And they're covert, and they've been very successful, including our own village from time to time. So I just wanted the board to be aware that the unit still is active. They're very active. It may look like our stats aren't that much, but when you're talking about a part-time organization, it's only working 4 days a month on average, and the officers receive no extra pay. So the chiefs assign their personnel to the unit, professionally aggressive officers, who for that day or 2 days are reassigned from their patrol assignment to this tactical assignment so that we don't incur a large amount of overtime. And that's done by every community. I would say that probably the two biggest communities that are in Wedge are Oak Park and probably Forest Park. They're probably the busiest for Wedge. Oak Park is certainly our biggest population-wise, and we've had full support from their chiefs and their command personnel. My personnel assigned to Wedge is Jim Lazansky, Eric Katzen, and we rotate them. So in a 3-year, we get other officers who can go in and get an experience to working. It's paid off. If those of you that remember that when we had the armed robbery of the jeweler on Burlington, Wedge played a role of making an arrest in Chicago at the flea market within 24 hours. Their tactical officers were directly involved in that investigation, and their expertise of tracking cell phones and et cetera led us to our suspects. So I will also release this tomorrow. I released it today to the chiefs and to the local news media. But if the board has any questions on those, I'll answer it. If not, we'll post that on our website also.
Steve? I guess the only thing I would say, Chief, is I'm glad you do this every year because it gives us a chance once a year to thank you and your department for what you do. I mean, you and your department do such good work. It's almost easy sometimes to take you for granted. And I know that all of our residents really appreciate the high quality of integrity and skill that you and your officers bring to bear on our community. So it doesn't go unnoticed, even though it might seem that way sometimes.
No, I'm glad we have full support from the village, and I appreciate that.
And then the extra, the above and beyond work you do, like with Wedge and legislative work, and it really means a lot to our community. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, I was in Springfield last week, but I had to bang my head against the wall. That's another issue for another day.
I know that feeling.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Weitzel. Next up is public comment. Would anybody like to address the board this evening? Yes, sir.
It's really kind of, it might be more appropriate, but I know eventually you're going to get around to zoning issues.
Yes.
So I kind of want to bring something up and provide the pass on for this. My name is Tom Barr, and I'm the owner of the property at 43 East Quincy. And I know people are aware of the fact that I've been trying to sell the building for a while. Just give you a little bit of background. I actually bought the building from the village 28 years ago. And, in trying to sell the building, the current zoning ordinance, which makes so many things special use, has made it very difficult for me to go and find people to buy the building. One of the things I've run into is that, in order to determine what the building could be used for, pretty much we've directed people to the village. And in doing so, we've had Sonia, go and look at what their application is. And typically everything almost is a special use. I know you're going to be talking about zoning issues and costs today. And one of the things I did is I provided a handout. And in that handout is a letter I originally received from the village that detailed what at that time did not require any additional zoning meeting or anything else to use the building for. And pretty much all the things that are currently special use were originally permitted. Sonia certainly has been doing her job. I certainly can't wrong her for questioning the people that come in or anything like that. And she's just trying to be conscientious and do what she feels that she needs to do. But you know, if you question what the law is, you kind of have to talk to the people that make the laws, and that's you guys. So that's kind of why I'm bringing it up. You know, currently I have the building under contract. It's to a person in Riverside here that's looking to use it for very similar use to the way I used it, as an office. But unfortunately requires a special use because almost everything is a special use on the property. The only things that aren't special use is if somebody rips it down, turns it into a condo or a family dwelling, and everything else almost is special use. What I'm really kind of asking is I would just like to maybe try to get some cooperation from the village, and I, kind of directed by you guys that make the laws, so that the sale can go as smoothly as possible, so that the special use application is facilitated. Now the thing is, in long term though, I really do believe that it's in the best interest of the property owners in the village that a lot of these uses that are currently special use really should be permitted uses. They were permitted originally. I know that there were good intentions. This is something that you guys have all inherited. It's not something that you created really. But it just has made it very, very difficult to really market the building. Like I said, when I was originally purchased the building, they gave me a whole list, which I gave you guys a copy of what the original permitted uses were. I'd like to go and eventually see it turned back. This is really probably the first instance of the mixed-use peripheral area, periphery area, actually having the need to even do this. I know you're going to be talking a little bit later about zoning issues and things like that and the cost of doing this. Prior to this, none of the other buildings in that area have really turned over, or they're just residential buildings or whatever. And I know at one point they were looking to include that piece of property in the central business district, but the problem with that is that in some ways that would further limit the use of that property given what that property is today. And that's one of the reasons I would basically be against that. If I would have had all the potential uses that when I originally bought the property from the village, I would have had no problem selling the property. The impact of having all these special uses has basically caused the property to be less valuable than it would have been otherwise. It's discouraged people from even bidding on the property because they don't want to have to deal with running it through the special use and all that sort of stuff. Like I said, Sonia is only doing her job, and I certainly realize that, and I certainly appreciate the effort that she's put in, and I certainly have gotten cooperation from both her and the village manager when I've gone in there. But really, it really would be nice if I didn't have to deal with that, because a lot of the things that are currently special uses really should be permitted uses. And I understand why they originally did that, and I think that the thought was that they could better manage the central business district, but certainly the new zoning code has not really helped the central business district at all as far as bringing new people in and things like that. Like I said, we're currently the way it's set up. So like I said, really my two requests are that one, that all efforts be done to make it as smooth as possible for the person that currently has the building under contract, who's also currently another Village of Riverside resident and is looking to use it for his office. And also long term, really I think that a lot of these uses should be permitted uses and not special uses. And then I think if they did that, it would make it easier for Sonia, the village, and everybody in the long term. And I thank all you guys for the effort that you put in. I certainly, last time I was here, I was actually I had run for village trustee and lost. And I had come back and told everybody, I said, you know what? I really hope you all the best. You know, I congratulated him on winning. And said, I hope I didn't have to come back again. I hadn't been back for a long time. This is the first time I've been here in years. And so, you know, at that point, I knew everybody. But at this point here, all you people, I really don't know that well. So thank you very much. And if you guys have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer anything that you have. What I've included there is, like I said, the original letter I got, a little write-up of kind of stating what I said here, a zoning map, because it ends up that the village zoning map that Sonia was using did not clearly designate what the peripheral area was and what the mixed-use peripheral is versus the retail core. And the maps she was using were very confusing, and that's the reason why she was misleading people, because she didn't have the tools she needed to really determine what area was what. This map that I've included here, I was very involved in 2003, but not because of my business property, but because my house was at 25 Long Common, and there were a lot more zoning issues and impacted on that than I thought there would ever on this. So if you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer anything that you have. If you don't have anything now, you have my cell phone number, feel free to call me too.
Trustees? I can just assure you that the special use, like every special use, will be expedited. It's our goal, the village's goal, to always make things as easy and as quick and as inexpensive as possible.
I know that when I asked Sonia, I said, how much is it? She said, well, I know they're going to be discussing it tonight, but I believe it's $1,000.
That's what it is right now, yes.
Yeah.
But we're talking about that tonight.
Yeah, so like I said, this is probably the first, I mentioned this to my wife, and we've only been married 3 years, so she wasn't through a lot of this stuff when I was doing it years ago. I think this is probably the first situation where this mixed-use peripheral area, that this kind of an issue has come up. The reason is if you look at the map, most of the other buildings haven't changed ownership, or they've been residential buildings which got added. And those people actually will have a problem if they ever wanted to do a tear down or something like that. So because of being included in the way they were and the way that the zoning codes are currently written.
This is very useful, thank you.
I couldn't find the current zoning code online either. I tried.
Yeah, it's there.
I
We can.
I don't doubt it.
Jessica can show you.
I did find it out. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anyone else like to address the board? Mr. Foley?
Michael Foley, 411 Selborne. Before you this evening, I believe you're going to be talking about some changes to the building ordinances. And I wish I could stay, but I can't, so I thought I would get up now and just say I applaud the board for making these changes, but there's a couple of them as a contractor I think you may want to take a second look at. And one of them is your use of the fencing. Safety fencing. I applaud the act that you're making people go away from the orange safety fencing that really doesn't hold up and ends up laying on the ground, and making them go to a 6-foot fence. I would recommend that you require some sort of windscreen, a green screen on the fencing, but I see in the packet that you're strongly suggesting going with a posted fence. And that's kind of hard in some instances, especially if you have a project where you have a shared driveway and you can't drive a post into your neighbor's driveway to protect the job site. So they do make panelized fences. They have feet. They come in 6 and 8 foot heights and 12-foot widths. And they do the same thing as a fence, but they're movable fences. Sometimes on a job site, you have to be able to move the fence to get equipment in, materials onto the job site, so forth. Having a fixed posted fence, in some instances also, can hurt some of the large mature trees that are on the property. And also you're recommending it for the parkway. And I don't think you want people driving posts into your parkway for fear of hitting, anything, even though it's marked. So you can go to a panelized fence option and get the same protection. That's one thing. You're also talking about a dumpster change out in 48 hours. That I would like to see possible to think about doing a 72-hour. If he's given a violation, and again, you're going to need people to police this. But if a contractor's given a notice to get a dumpster out and it's on a Friday, they can't get it out till Monday or Tuesday, usually Tuesday, because most of the cartage companies don't have a lot of trucks to pick up the dumpsters. So I just wanted to talk about those two things and have you think about them in the wording of the new ordinance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. It's very helpful. Anyone else? Moving on, next up are the reports of village officers. First is a motion to appoint Samantha Schroeder to the Riverside Historical Commission. I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Collins.
Second.
Second by Ms. Hamilton. I can just tell you that Ms. Schroeder brings a wealth of experience and also especially passion for historical preservation, and I'm quite confident she's going to do a wonderful job on the commission. So I'd ask you to call the roll.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is a discussion of Swan Pond. I just wanted to report to the board on some work that I've been doing on the Swan Pond issue. I've had a series of meetings with representatives from the Olmsted Society and also some wetland experts about what we might think about doing down in Swan Pond. And I've also been talking with Chairwoman Maloney from the LAC. The route I would like to suggest, first, it was my impression that we had a consensus that what this board was really interested in was reestablishing a wetland area down there. If you look, a friend of mine, a scientist, said something very interesting the other day. He said, if you look at Swan Pond, it's telling you what it wants to be. And if you really look from the top of the sled hill, you can kind of see where the water starts to sit. And it's about a 200-yard pace back, and then there's an elevation. So what some of the wetland folks have suggested is that we could go back into the really wet area where the culvert is and reestablish the plantings that the Army Corps did or attempted to do before that section was, as you remember, picked up by the ice and moved. And then do a series of zoning plantings using mixed seeds. Now, in order to do that, it can't be something that's just done on an amateur level. It's something that we would actually need a design for. It's possible that something like that could be implemented in-house by our public works and by our volunteers, but we would need a proper design. So what Ms. Maloney suggested was she and LAC can put together a limited list of organizations and groups out there that might be able to help us. She mentioned, for example, the botanical gardens might be able to help us. I also am collecting a series of names from the folks that I worked with. And what I would suggest is that we then allow the LAC to really kind of vet that broader group, narrow it down to a limited number, and then the village can send out a request for information or request for qualifications. I'm not quite sure what the proper term is, to try to narrow down who we might select to do an actual design down there. It's my impression that we are not going to have any luck fighting Mother Nature, that she wants that to be a wetland area. That's what it's going to be. So our goal, I think, is to find the most cost-effective and especially the most beautiful way that we can to reestablish that area as a wetland. So I just want to tell you that's what's been going on, and to see if you have any thoughts, yay or nay, about that approach.
I'm very happy with that approach. I think that's the appropriate way to go.
Is everybody else okay with that?
I think I too am happy with that. In fact, I think I would encourage that, because we should make that a showcase for wetlands.
It really
that's
should
what our
be a
village
jewel.
is all about.
It's a jewel of our village, and it needs to be reestablished. Okay, well, with that in mind, I will proceed along that route. And that is all I have. Manager Francis.
I do not have a report this evening.
Next up is approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items any trustee needs to address? I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton, second by Mr. Lumsden. Please call the roll.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up, reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Are there any liaison reports?
I don't have a liaison report, but I do have a bit of interesting news. Today at 11 o'clock, Chicago's Best TV was filming at Molly's Public House. It was a great time. The place was packed, and they did a nice segment on Molly's, and it will be airing on Channel 9 on May 15th. So set your DVR.
I know that our Cable Commission just released the video of when Dan Andrews and Jeffrey Barrett were here for the pre-screening. Can you remind everybody about where that can be found?
It could be found on the village website. It can be found on YouTube, the Riverside TV website, AT&T Channel 9, and Comcast Channel 6.
If you didn't get a chance to see that, I encourage you to watch it. Dan and Jeffrey were really delightful, and they had a lot of really interesting insights specific to Riverside that I think people would be interested in hearing. Anything else?
I think to Trustee Ballerin's comment, it would be nice to send out an e-flash too on that, and just to promote our businesses and publicity and for the village.
It will be done.
It was interesting watching that program. I thought my husband commented that of the 10 towns that were done, that Riverside was definitely the one that you would want to live in based on the ones that they did. So I think it was very good for the village.
It was, yeah. Some of those drone shots were amazing. Yeah, it was very cool. And I kind of it was my civic duty to go to all the various places that were showing it that night. So, and I can attest to the fact that there were good crowds at all. Yeah. So. Next up, ordinances. Oh, Ms. Apt, you have a streetscape update? See?
Yes, I thought I'd provide a brief streetscape update. Things are progressing well with the Burlington Streetscape and Resurfacing Project. This week they finished up pouring the planters on the south side of the street and have been finishing up putting in the utilities, including the electric and the irrigation system, into the planters along the street. So that is moving along well. They should be backfilling along those areas, and the aprons were poured this week for the driveways on the south side of the street for the different parking lots, and they were able to pour the crosswalks at I believe Cowley and Herbert and Delaplane. So those have been poured and they've been backfilling in that area. We're poised next week for them to begin forming and pouring the concrete ribbon, which will hopefully have us getting started on the paver work here very quickly. So that is our update. We're still working on the south side of the street, but we're coming along nicely.
Question? I guess I would like to say that at the chamber meeting the other night, I was very pleased that, our businesses are really being troopers about this, and it is hurting them. There's no question that it's harder to get there, and they are seeing a little drop in business. So I would just renew my request for everyone to step up and make sure that you support our businesses during this time. They're being very supportive of this work, as are our residents. But don't be scared off. The sidewalks are open, the street is open. You might have to walk through some gravel, but you can get to every place you want to go. So please go downtown. Anything else? Okay. Next up, ordinances and resolution. The first is an ordinance amending the budget amendment number 1 for the fiscal year beginning January 2015, ending December 31, 2015. Marco.
Good evening, Board of Trustees. So coming before the board is an ordinance to amend the budget for fiscal year ending December 31st, 2015. The annual audit of the village's financials is now being completed, and finance is currently finishing up assembling the actual report. We anticipate bringing the report before the board next month for approval. Just want to point out that the only fund that needs an amendment is the general fund. None of the village's other 7 funds requires amending. Included in your agenda packet is an exhibit, Exhibit A, which identifies the specific accounts requiring amendment, the magnitude of such amendments, and additional explanatory information. I will answer any questions that the board may have concerning the budget amendment.
Questions? I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Hamilton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Sedeby. Please call the roll.
Trustee Ballerine.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next up is an ordinance amending the village code of Village of Riverside relative to construction practices and building site regulations. Ms. Apt.
Yes, over the past construction season, my department has made note of certain areas where our ordinance fails to provide my staff with the tools it needs to properly manage job sites and projects that are not making significant progress. So staff has surveyed other communities and worked with the village attorney to create new regulations for permit renewals and building site management that will allow the village to ensure safe and clean job sites, provide for recourse if they are not maintained, and also provide recourse and standards for projects that do not make progress and their building permits expire. The building code states that a permit shall expire either at 18 months from the date of issuance, or if no work has begun within 3 months of the permit being issued, or C, if the work is abandoned, and then it provides the different scenarios of what equals abandoned work. Currently, the code does allow permits to be renewed if they do expire and the work has not been completed. These renewals are for an additional 18 months. Staff has received numerous complaints from neighbors adjacent to projects where work has stalled, and they are frustrated that potentially they will have to live adjacent to a construction site for an additional 18 months. Staff has proposed an amendment that would add failure to make significant progress as a reason that a permit would expire, and also to add conditions for a permit renewal. Pardon me. These conditions would include renewal periods being determined by the community development director, however, not to exceed 6 months. So this would allow for a maximum construction period of 24 months for a project rather than 36 months. If more than 6 months is needed for a project, the village manager would need to approve that additional time. The applicant must provide reasons for why the job was not completed, including the dates when work began, when it was suspended or interrupted, and the last date on which work was performed. The applicant must also provide a revised construction schedule for review by the Community Development Director to review and approve. This schedule must prioritize the completion of exterior work to minimize the impact on the neighbors. Additionally, there would be additional performance security in an amount to be determined by the Community Development Director to secure the timely completion of the permit work and the restoration of the work site and any public right-of-way or public property. It would also require written notification to all the neighbors within 250 feet of that project site, providing them with brief description of the remaining work in the proposed schedule and the fact that somebody has applied to renew that permit. The neighbors may provide written comments to the Community Development Director, who shall consider those comments in determining the length of time the permit shall be in effect and what site management requirements should be imposed as a condition of the permit. Staff is also proposing revisions to our site management standards relative to fencing, dumpsters, and site management bonds. Staff is recommending that we move to post-driven chain link fencing for safety fencing rather than allowing the plastic snow fencing, which quickly becomes a maintenance problem. Staff is recommending the tree fencing in the right-of-way also be chain link. We're recommending that all porta potties be provided for any site where indoor facilities are not provided. Currently, we only require it for when new single-family homes are being built or when a single-family home is being demolished. Staff is also recommending that filled dumpsters must be emptied within 48 hours. We're recommending that the requirement for a site management bond be extended to include large construction projects besides just the demolition or construction of new principal structures. So this would include large additions and remodels. This would provide the village with recourse if construction sites and adjacent rights-of-way are not maintained. The site management bonds for these construction projects would range from $500 to $3,000. You have a redlined copy of the proposed amendments before you. We are looking for you to approve these code amendments so we can get them enacted here quickly as the construction season is upon us.
So I'd ask for a motion to approve an ordinance amending the village code of the Village of Riverside relative to construction practices and building site regulations.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ballerine. Need a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Collins. Discussion. Mr. Lumsden.
I just was wanting to, the stuff that Mr. Foley mentioned, I think has some merit to it in regards to pounding posts in the right-of-way. And the challenge is if you don't put posts in and you put windscreen on it, they blow over. So we've kind of, if we would, the panelized fence is is going to help the contractor with the contracting process. And I think though that if we thought about or considered panelized fencing, we need to include how it's sandbagged down, because those usually have feet on them, and then you put sandbags on them. They can stick out onto sidewalks. So I mean, if we do it the panelized method, which I actually do agree with, because pounding the fences all the way around there, they end up bumping them with equipment, and then they're bent, and then it's going to be just as much of a headache for you guys as it is with a snow fence, right? Because and all of our Riverside sites are really tight anyway. If you go to the one that Joe's doing right across the street from the swim club, I mean, that's just right by where you live. That's a really tight site. Those guys would have a heck of a time if we had a posted fence roll right now, right? Just dragging hose or whatever. So I think these are some pretty straightforward comments, and that the panelized fence piece probably should either be allowed or on special request because it's a tight site, or some of those kind of things I think would be very helpful to help our contractors on behalf of our residents. And then the 72 hours versus 48 hours. Again, I think over the weekend is a challenge for that, but I think there's some discretion that can be, involved in that. Can you guys, when you go out to a site, can you say instead of 48 hours like this, if it is a Friday, say by Tuesday at noon?
Yes.
When you write the citation,
So typically,
right?
if we're noticing that there's an issue on Friday, we will say, do your best to get this taken care of as soon as possible. I want to call by the end of the day, verifying when this is being removed.
So then they schedule it, and they say they're scheduled for Tuesday at noon,
Exactly.
and everybody's working together. That seems to me to be fair and reasonable. So those were my comments.
So what is your thought on the windscreen to keep the
Well,
dirt and dust from?
The windscreens, I mean, the pros of having windscreen on there is if you're the neighbor, you don't have to look at a bunch of construction stuff for whatever period of time it is. The downside is they blow over, and then you have a maintenance headache, or then the village folks have to call the contractor after a storm goes through, and they have to get out there and re-sandbag them and set them down. If they maintain them, they stay up pretty well, but that just adds. So the windscreens, what we do now is we call them cutting smileys into them, but you put the windscreen up and then you cut the little C shapes into it, so when you do get a wind that blows, it allows it to vent the piece of fence down. The other thing that we do is we stake the corners, and then you put it up in between there, so that then it has somewhere to benchmark against.
And to your point, there was a site over in Lawton where they had driven post, and like you said, they hit it with a piece of heavy equipment.
And it just bent it over, and then it's sitting there, and it's so hard to fix. So again, I think that these things are kind of a moving target depending on the actual project site. But giving you guys the flexibility to not, because I could see a situation where somebody said, "Well, can I use a panelized fence?" And right now, it makes really good sense, and it's probably the safer route to go.
Right.
And you would, unfortunately, if we did it like it is right now, would not be able to allow that.
Right.
I mean, I think I really am very pleased with this. We have had a number of problems with projects just stalling out, and our residents having to sit and look at Tyvek for months on end. So I really like that we're finally giving some teeth to our site management. Is there any disagreement about the posting versus the panelized? Is everybody okay with that, with the sandbags and?
I agree with Trustee Livingston.
What about leaving it at 48 with?
Well, can we stay with that one?
Pardon me?
I was trying to get your attention.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure which is better regarding post-driven fence or the movable one. The problem with the movable one is that the contractors move them, and now you get equipment parked under a tree that's going to damage the tree. Because part of the reason for the fencing is to protect the drip line of a tree. On the other hand, I can see where actually digging the post is a problem.
But isn't tree protection still posted? I think don't we already require around trees to be physically posted, even though we use because they're driving fence posts in right now and tying the orange fabric to it around the drip line of the tree. Again,
So we're just switching it to post-driven.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. To protect our trees, especially in our city right away, when we kind of let them use the parkway and stuff as part of their construction zone, we definitely need to protect the trees with a post pounded in and chain link fence around it. And those they shouldn't be moving anyway.
Right.
This is more of like your you have a load of joists show up one day, and the truck needs to swing it around there, so you slide the fence out of the way, you swing it in, you set it up, and before you leave at the end of the night, you button your fence up so it's safe and secure again.
So your recommendation is specifically for on the site, not for the tree fencing?
Correct.
So the tree fencing would be post-driven,
Chain link.
Yeah, because
and the others would be movable with sandbags.
that's the way I would recommend it. That seems to be on the
Or
construction
you
side.
would be saying that you would allow staff to have the flexibility to
Yes.
allow post-driven or the sand?
Yeah, I mean,
for on the site.
if they have a really tight site, that two houses are really close together, which will happen a lot, there's no reason to have a movable fence at that point. It would make sense to pound the fence in, get it up nice and secure, put some screening on it, so that the people next door for the 18-month, hopefully it doesn't go longer than that, 24-month, can have some sort of a sane life in their backyard in their house. But if it's toward the street side or there's more land off to the side, then that's where you would have the flexibility to go with a sandbagged.
And that is typically where they do put those currently, when they.
We can set it up so that there's a general rule of a preferred method, and we can leave it as it is in the code, and then add language to give the, to
I
give
want to
Sonia.
give these guys the right to work
Right,
with
to
people
say,
without
so
having to
this
impact
would
us
be,
again.
this is what's expected, but it can be varied with approval of Sonia with, in order to better protect the site, to better protect trees. Because I mean, you want the trees protected, but if you're pounding posts in and there's a better way to do it because of that site, she would have the flexibility to make those changes. We could add that language.
Yeah, don't they come in and say, here's my site, and we have to do this all the time, here's my site plan, here's how we're planning to do it.
Yeah, it's
And
usually
authorities
they have-
having jurisdiction will tell us, we're like, hey, we're good with that, but we want the corners, the first 3 sections to be rigid, and then we'll allow you to have the flexibility out here so that we get some good structure on the corner.
And I think realistically, because of how you enforce, there's always some discretion. So there is some of that discretion. We could clarify what it's for in order to better protect the site or deal with existing conditions.
Yeah, because the other thing too is when we go with the panelized, they usually hire a subcontractor that has it. They show up, they're nice, they're clean, they're tubed all the way around the outside. They put them up to the stanchions and the posts, and it looks pretty darn decent. Where otherwise you get a guy that pounds post in that hasn't done a lot, and it's sagging, it doesn't have a top rail on it, and then if somebody tried to climb over it, they put the sharp side up, some things like that. So the panelized system is, I think visually for the neighbors, will look a lot better for them.
So is everybody okay with that approach?
Yeah. One other thing on the fences, though, I missed anything in the draft about windscreens. What are we suggesting there?
We weren't suggesting anything. That was something that Mr. Foley brought up as possibly requiring the windscreen.
So I'll just, my opinion on the windscreens, it's fine on the side or back of the property, but I would not want the front or the parkway to have windscreens where it's blocking sight lines for pedestrians and vehicles.
Well, I know Chief's right there. Do you have a preference, Chief, on being able to see into construction sites?
I think from the street level, yes. From neighbors on the side, we wouldn't have to take a preference, but because the officers are going to pull up in front of a house, I bet you the fire department would also prefer that the front not be screened.
Is that okay with you?
I think there's a safety element to that where
Yeah.
you can see and see out. And because the other than when these guys do drive-bys to take a look to see if they're leaving material stored longer, it could happen a lot quicker and more speedy. I got a couple more unless somebody else has something. So the external scope, again, this is in trying to have our construction folks have the rules very clear.
Can you tell us where you're?
Oh, I'm just talking, it's what Sonia mentioned when she was reading. She was talking about the exterior scope, working with them to make sure at a minimum, if they go for an extension, the exterior scope is buttoned up and wrapped up. Because I think that's the most detrimental to the neighbors is when they have, like you said, the Tyvek blowing in the breeze for 18 months.
So I believe that's pages 115 and 116.
Thank you.
For your reference.
Again, I highly support working really, really hard with our contracting and developer community to get the exterior scope wrapped up so the neighbors don't have to live next to that. We already have pretty decent hours, so they don't have to hear nail guns and things like that when their kids are still sleeping. So I think we've got that pretty well covered. I think that trying to get the exterior done, buttoned in, and weather tight, we can get the buildings weather tight, then they will be pretty acoustically tight, right? And looking better from the outside, so that if a developer does run into a financial situation, they at least have to stick to their schedule to get the outside shell and core done. And then if they need to hold off or something like that, there's some more flexibility for them to financially on the interior, or when they're trying to tailor the inside of the home to a specific client, they may be wanting to do a partial sell or to tailor the home. So sometimes that's a period of time where we get the outside buttoned up, and then let them have a little more flexibility on the inside. I think that would help the neighbors.
So is it possible to add something about watertight the way Mr. Lumpson's? Because I can think of one property on Fairbanks that sat there without windows for months on end.
Yeah.
And then tied back out there.
Well, again, that's how moisture gets in buildings, and then it starts to get premature rot when they sell it, and it has mold and mitigation issues.
How long it's sat there basically open. So is everybody okay with that?
Then I got one more. Sorry, and I know it's a Hawks night, so this is killing me.
That's okay. We're not going anywhere for a while. So.
The bond requirement, does that if a person's doing it themselves and they qualify to be able to do construction themselves for certain parts, like the DIYers, is that bond still required for those folks?
Well, we're putting it in with the construction value, so typically you're not getting a DIYer that's bringing in something that's going to be over $100,000 in value. They're I have an odd duck here and there that is doing that because they are a contractor by trade, and as they have time, they work on their home. Unfortunately, those tend to be some of our problem children, where it's taking them 3 to 5 years to finish their home. So
there's an equation there where they keep their people working on other people's jobs, and then they have a project of their own to keep their staff on board until the next one comes around, or the fill-in time frame. So that's probably what you're up against, right?
A little bit, yes.
It's a good business plan. It's kind of a pain if you live next to it.
Well, and I think that's the important thing. I mean, we want to support builders and all when they're working here in town, but I have not been pleased with what you call some of our problem children. And I think it's important that contractors understand that this board feels about our residential areas the same way we feel about our business areas. That we're going to enforce our maintenance laws, and we're not going to let people make their neighbors' lives miserable for months on end. So hopefully this, I hope all the builders and developers out there take note of this, because we're going to be enforcing it. So,
what about the dumpster?
I tend to think 48 hours and giving our folks the discretion to talk to them.
How about working days?
Can I comment on that?
Please.
I think the dumpster, I even before Mr. Foley even spoke, I had a note here that I think the dumpster should be within 24 hours. Because we shouldn't have to notify these people to empty their overflowing dumpster. They should just do it. I mean, if we have to notify them, then get it done.
Whatever, this really inherently, the solution to failing to comply with this is a ticket. So automatically, even without putting discretion in there, this one really is one where Sonia would have discretion in deciding whether to issue a ticket. So whether it's 24 hours or 48 or 72, you probably want the shortest period that's reasonable to expect the dumpster, and then let Sonia exercise discretion for circumstances where it's a holiday weekend, there's a problem getting the company out, and they provide specifics, and then Sonia says, well, as long as it's done by that, then we'll be okay.
Do we still dictate the dumpster company?
Yes. They have to be registered with the village. So we have a list of, I want to say about 5 or 6 rollaway companies that have posted
here's
bonds.
what happens, and I wish Mike was still here to answer the question, but I bet you 21, if they're mandated to use somebody, you get less service because you don't have any competition. And so if I'm a contractor, my dumpster gets filled up because the guys clean up like I told them and it's full, and then I call them, they put you on the list, but they're going to take the ones that they have to take first because
Can we,
Contractor has no.
Anybody can get registered.
Yeah, it's just a registration.
Okay.
We don't dictate anyone
Don't
coming.
dictate it, okay, that's a
We
different
don't and we
situation,
can't.
right?
Yeah, it's a matter of just being on a list. Anybody
we just-
can be on a
Okay.
list.
We don't let them just call anybody
But the-
and say, here's people who are currently registered. If people you want to use are not on our list, they have to get licensed with the village and provide their
When we
certificate of
license them,
insurance.
do we let them know that there's a 48-hour rule so that they know they have to service these guys and help them out? If they want to stay registered?
We can certainly add that to the list.
Yeah, I mean, that would be
Can we-
something, if you enact the rule, you would, that's to
Mhm.
button
Yeah.
that up. So in order for businesses to be registered, they have to acknowledge what the requirement is.
Is there a reason you picked 48 though, instead of 24?
It's pretty soon.
Well,
48
was
is
to
pretty
allow
standard.
a little bit of leeway. I would like it picked up in 24 hours. However, if we're not noticing that a dumpster is overflowed until 3 p.m., they might not be able to get somebody out there the very next day. So this allows that flexibility for it to then carry over till the next day, but at least we've done the notification, they have to get it done. Currently, typically, as I said, if we notice something like that, we say, well, you need to get this cleaned up by the end of the day. And then, of course, they say, it's 3 o'clock, I can't get somebody out here. And we say, okay, well, call somebody and let us know when you can get it done, but I would prefer that this be done by the end of the day. And then negotiations
I
and
like
so.
giving these guys the biggest teeth they can, because then it just helps people to.
So we want to
you're
make it
kinda helping
24
our
then?
contractors help themselves.
Sounds like we want to make it 24.
It doesn't matter what it is, as long as these guys have the discretion
Right.
to say, okay, I get it, it can't happen in 24 hours, but it's gonna be by Tuesday at noon.
And,
I'm
and, and,
fine
and
with shortening it to 24 hours, like I said, I'm willing to be reasonable to a point, but if it's somebody that's a repeat offender, if they can't get it done in 24 hours, I'm perfectly happy with issuing a ticket after 24 hours.
But 24 hours, I don't think is reasonable.
I don't think it's reasonable.
It's not reasonable. You can't
Yeah,
get
I
something
don't
done in
think it's
24 hours.
reasonable either.
Yeah.
Because I know, even if I call them,
No.
we hire dumpsters all the time, we're not gonna get 24 hours.
No, why would-
For that.
but you're a responsible builder, you're not gonna ever get called. Because you're gonna have your dumpster
You're gonna plan.
emptied every
Yeah,
time
I
it gets
agree.
full.
Right.
So it's the people who
If I'm
are.
noticing it,
It's not
And
necessary.
I can tell you that besides the length of time of construction projects, the number one complaint in most villages is an overflowing dumpster and trash and debris blowing onto my property. And this is a critical thing that contractors have to keep on. And so whatever it is, we need to be tough on this one, in my opinion. And whether it's giving staff that discretion or just saying 24 hours, whatever, but we need to be real strict.
I don't know if I came across a 24 hour. We have some that are 48 hours. Most of the time we see 72 hours. And in some locations, we have to keep them covered at night. Covered if they're not being
Yeah.
filled.
Right.
Do we require them to do shoots out of second floors? Or can they just toss crap out the second one? Sorry, construction material.
they can just toss stuff.
We don't have a shoot requirement. Okay.
so it sounds like we're back to 48.
What if you did something like 48 or 72, but after 24 hours it has to be covered? An overflowing dumpster, or a full dumpster has to be covered to
If it
mitigate.
can't be, if we notify you and it can't be emptied within 24 or 48 hours, that
it has to
they're
be
required to
covered.
put a cover on it, I think would be,
Some
especially
sort of-
with, if you're in notifying somebody that it's full and there is blowing materials, you'd like them to at least
Put a
get it
screen
covered
over
up
it.
as soon as possible, tarp over it or something as soon as possible.
Do we have the staff capability to police and enforce that? What does that mean?
Yeah, I think we're driving by the sites on a regular basis. So we can, certainly call them and say, hey, I noticed your dumpster is overflowing. And 9 times out of 10, they say, yeah, I've got to call in, they're going to be in tomorrow morning. So we're kind of noticing it as if they're noticing it. But there are those few times where we get calls or we go by and it's,
So
it
do we
hasn't
like
been
that
addressed.
alternative then 48, and if it can't be done in 24, we cover it? Is that a good compromise?
Is that something?
If it's windy or, those kind of things.
What's that?
Is that something you can do as a
Oh,
contractor?
yeah. Our insurance provider, we're covering them now just to prevent dumpster diving and people getting hurt.
So that's material that you have to cover.
Yeah, so,
I'm in favor of that.
with local scrappers jumping on the job sites, do we require the dumpsters to be all fenced in, inside the fenced in area?
I prefer for it to be, but we
Yeah.
do not require it to be.
Well, and again, our standard practice is if we're inside a single fence, we tarp the dumpsters in the evenings, And that's primarily so we don't get somebody climbing in there and getting hurt, poked, and then trying to, that's a litigation risk management thing.
Well, I'm surprised by that. So is it typical that that places require the dumpsters be within the fencing? Because it seems to me that would be one of the main reasons for having the fencing is to keep people out of the dumpsters. Unless
I don't think it's typical. I've seen it, but it's.
Is it sometimes just a logistical problem
Yeah,
that
it
it
depends
just
on the
can't be?
community. It depends on the community and the size of the lots.
Roofers end up having a challenge with that. If you have a requirement to have the dumpster enclosed, then they come in for one day when they do their huge tear off for 2 days or 3 days, and then the requirement to put the fence around it. That's why I was asking if we had it, because that can be one that's
And the
it's a
dumpster's
challenge.
sitting on the driveway.
So dumpster sitting on the driveway, they're not doing a full fence around it, they're doing an isolated roof renovation or something like that. And so they're tearing something off, it might be there 2 or 3 days. Those are the ones that then we cover.
So-
If we're inside of a fence, then we know we don't cover.
So this compromise suggestion about it's 48 hours, but if it can't be done within 24, it's going to be covered. Is this getting too complicated to enforce? Would it be, I mean, what is, you're at the front
Right.
line that has to do this. So what would your preference be, how to handle this?
I think that it would be helpful to have it written in there, because then that helps give us teeth to say. I mean, there are some that will just ignore you, and they would not cover it as a suggestion by my inspector or myself. Whereas if I say it's in the code, it's got to be covered, then then they're going to argue less or ignore us less.
And I support that too, because, I mean, the contractors are gonna take whatever the ordinance is and they're gonna print it
Right.
out, and when they get their contract for the dumpsters, they're gonna say, hey, by the way, you need to follow all these, right? And then, so it's also gonna help the general contractor or the homeowner, even if they bought it, to have some teeth to make sure that the guy comes and picks it up when they ask.
I think if we're as explicit as possible, like I liked putting in here that we want to prioritize the exterior work, because that puts the contractors on notice that they need to be thinking about that as they're planning their jobs. If it's not in there anywhere, and then I say, hey, you really should do this, they've already worked out their workflow and have their contractors scheduled, and they don't know that. When you have it in the code, it's there, and you're having your pre-construction meetings, and you can say, this is ABC, this is what you need to be doing, then they have that all in front of them. And if we're at that pre-construction meeting and saying, just so you know, if you're not able to clean up a dumpster within 24 hours of it getting full, you need to put some sort of screening on top of it. They have that then in the back of their heads.
Because I think it's important, I feel the same way about this as we do our other maintenance issues. If we're not going to enforce it, it's useless. And these folks, I mean, you're very gracious, but they need to understand these aren't requests. This is our law, and they're going to obey it. It's not a matter of, we would prefer you to do this. If it's in here, it's going to be done. And I just want to make sure that we're not putting too much of a burden on you with your limited staff, that you actually have the wherewithal to enforce these things. So speak now or forever hold your peace.
I think that is a nice solution to have that in there about covering the dumpster.
Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Did you get that, Mr. Molina?
Yep.
Because I think that's also responsive to our village people and the neighbors of construction projects, right? That can be a daunting period of time when the house next door is being built, right?
I think several of us have been through it.
You've got a question here.
Mr. Pollard?
Two other things I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
One is you had a notice to neighbors
Yes.
provision. Is that after the 18 months?
Yeah, well, that's after the permit expires. So if they are renewing a permit because the permit expired and they have not completed the work, that it would require the notification of the neighbors within 250 feet that the person has applied to renew that permit. And then
And what, I'm a little bit concerned about that. For one, it seems a little bit onerous, but it also seems a little bit misleading to the neighbors, as if like a public hearing where they can come in and say, don't grant this extension. I mean, if you did that and the neighbors all said, don't grant this extension, well, you got to grant the extension, because otherwise the house sits unfinished forever. So, what's the purpose of notifying the neighbors? I mean, if you're comfortable with that, that's fine, but it just, I don't quite get it. The other thing I wanted to...
Can you respond to that? What's the...
Okay, well, I think I saw it in another ordinance, and I thought that was an interesting idea. that, typically the complaints that we are getting are from people in the immediate area around a construction site when things have stalled or things are messy, and when is this gonna be done? I haven't seen them there in 2 weeks. What's going on? This place looks like a disaster. I'm tired of living next to this for, the past 18 months. And then you tell them, I'm going to renew the permit for another 18 months, and it's an unpleasant conversation that happens. I think affording them the inclusion in the process by sending them a notice and saying, this project has applied for a renewal of their expired permit for the remodeling or the addition or whatever the work is that was being done. This is their proposed time schedule. If you have any comments or feedback, please provide that to the community development director within the next 2 weeks. That will be considered, any of your comments or concerns will be considered as we determine what the conditions of this permit and what the extension period will be. It affords them to buy into that process. We want the project to get continued, but it allows me to have that opportunity to find out what is their biggest concern.
Okay.
And then I can say their biggest concern is getting the siding on or getting the backyard graded and sodded and getting the fencing down. Then I can say, well, that is their first priority. Here it is in the construction schedule, and that should be done by this time. And we can begin that dialogue, or I can then make sure that is the first priority that is done.
That makes sense, as long as that wording is very carefully done so that they're not misled into thinking that it's more than just we're getting your comments on the nature of the extension that's going to be granted.
Right. I think it's similar to the notification that we require, except in this time it's coming from the village versus the contractor about notifications for grading work or notifications of demolitions, because we do require notification of all properties within 250 feet of a demolition, and we require notification of all the adjacent property owners for any proposed grading that's happening on the site.
I'm familiar with the notice to neighbors. It's not common, but I'm very familiar with one community that uses it, and it's probably where Michael and I both do work for. And I think people have generally found it somewhat helpful. I mean, this is a difficult area because when are you ever going to deny the extension, which basically has the perverse effect of, it's really a matter of making sure it stays on the radar screen, and people sometimes will get ticketed, but you're always going to grant the extension because you want it finished. So it's a difficult situation, but the notice to neighbors is sort of a way of staff knowing that the neighbors have been notified, and then they can come in, and neighbors will, and then staff becomes aware. It's not like a hearing, Trustee Pollock, but if it's worded properly, it gives them a say in what's important, and then it can help Sonia make the appropriate suggestions about order.
Ms. Collins?
That's what I was going to say. We just need to be careful how it's worded, and I think it's a good idea because it can direct how this process is going to go from there.
Mr. Valerie?
Could we, instead of notifying the neighbors via, sending out a letter to everyone within 200, could we do the same thing we do for a variation and put a sign in the front yard saying this house is permit is going to be extended? That way we know what the wording is. Any questions related to this, please see the community development director at 447-2700. That way it doesn't just tell the neighbors, it tells everyone in the community what's going on. I mean, there's times I drive by a house that is, a mile away from mine, and I'm wondering, what's going on with their place. Rather than, somebody has to fill out all those letters, somebody has to write all the letters. I mean, we just had a stock sign, stick it in the front yard.
Think of that.
Well, I would hope that this is so infrequent that the cost benefit of constructing a sign for it would not be making it worthwhile. But if it happens a lot, then maybe we make signs. The public hearing notices, we do that on a regular basis. So I would say we start with the letters and see how that goes, and then if we want to come back to the sign, I'm fine with the sign too. I actually made a note that maybe that was an option, so I think it's a good idea. But
be more cost effective, that's for sure. There's
Cost of time, yeah.
That's fine.
That's where I'm getting at. It's just the time, staff time.
Well, there is a minimum purchase for creating a sign, so I'd be buying a bulk of, 50 or 80 of them, whatever the minimum amount is. and then just have the blanks to fill in.
I'm for empowering these guys to do what makes their life easier
Yeah.
and gets the message out. I think it's a good idea to have the neighbors notified, because there might be some small little thing that's just irking them, and if you know that, you can negotiate that in order to get your extension. You need to move the compressor to the other side of the yard because it's driving their dog nuts. It might be just something as simple as that.
Wait, do we just want to put in here that they'll be notified and leave the matter of notification up to staff?
I would.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Is that reasonable?
And I have one last thing.
Please.
It's page 115 of the PDF document at the bottom where it talks about that the application shall include for renewal shall include schedule. The exterior work shall be completed first, and no final plumbing or electrical inspection shall be completed until the exterior work has been completed. My suggestion, that came from, I think it came from a conversation I had with Sonia and Jessica. And the intent is to get the exterior work done first. We touched on that earlier. And so my intent was to set a 1-year deadline for finishing the exterior. And then after 1 year, you get no inspections on the interior. Not just final plumbing or final building, but no inspections on the interior after 1 year until the exterior is finished. I think that's 1 year is plenty of time for, unless it's winter conditions, and then they can go to May 15th because it's middle of winter, you can't plant seed or sod. But otherwise, I would want this to say 1 year to complete the exterior, and then after that, we're not doing any more inspections on the interior.
So your idea of the exterior is not only the house, but the plantings, the driveway?
Yeah. I mean, the plantings are just grass because there's no required landscaping other than grass. But they have to grade it out, remove the fencing, have the windows in the siding, and have it look like a finished house. Because that's the big issue for neighbors. I mean, yeah, the construction noise, even if they're working inside, can be an annoyance, but probably not if the house is boxed up. It's really getting that out. And so what happens is builders, if you don't have something like that, builders will finish the inside down to, you know, the finest detail before they even think about grading the property. And so, you know, that'll be the last thing they do is grade the property and remove the fencing and all the junk on the outside. So this forces them to reprioritize and, you know, get that done within 1 year. After that, we're not doing any more inspections. So you're going to be delayed on the inside if you don't get the outside done.
Is this
So
common?
I was going to ask that very question to our
I mean, I've never
attorney.
seen
That
Well,
that I haven't seen.
I've never seen
I
it.
mean, it's ideal, but I've never seen a project operate that way.
I can understand grading the property, but putting in grass,
Who's
it's
going to
going to
take care of
die.
it?
Who's going to take care of it?
Why would it die?
Because nobody's going to water it.
Why wouldn't they?
There's no homeowner if they're building a
There may be
house.
no water.
And there might not be.
Well, but if it's an addition or some, I
Yeah.
mean,
And their driveway, what happens if he wants to put in a paper driveway, but still has a dumpster in the driveway because he wants to do work?
I know it's been effective. I've done it myself, and it's been very effective in getting projects done and in a timely fashion.
It would definitely be a motivator.
Yeah.
Thinking about it from my perspective, trying to do that, would be like, okay.
I would agree with butting up the house, for sure. Buttoning up the house, make sure the house is...
Yeah, I'm fine with the house, but not the,
Well, and that's why every once in a while I've seen it where they use the word watertight, because then people are using finished materials rather than just plywood scabbed over the top, and they're considered, okay, I've got it closed up. But, because the window investment is one of your bigger investments, is to get the windows in. It's also one that gets damaged, right? So that's the one where you try and technically hold off as long as you possibly can to put that dollar value into your development, because it's at risk one way or another.
So do you want to make a motion to see if people want to do that, or is there
Sure.
is there support for Mr. Pollack's idea, or we don't have to make it formal? What do you guys think? It doesn't look
I
like
think
it.
the idea that the grass is going to die is quite frankly, a bit silly because you plant grass and seed and you water it and it gets established and then Mother Nature will take care of it. I mean, I don't water my grass on a regular basis or at all, and it lives. Once it's established, it's established.
I don't think that's true.
I think some of the concern, Trustee Pollock, though, is, I mean, they might have paver sidewalks or more decorative items that they're not going to want to put in before, as they're bringing equipment and materials in and out of the house.
What heavy equipment do you bring in once the outside's finished?
Air conditioners,
Sheetrock.
refrigerators,
Sheetrock's the
sheetrock,
biggest
a
thing.
truck coming in with stuff.
You gotta flow your sheetrock in there, and that's your heavy, awkward.
True.
And then you got your trash, your sheetrock coming out into the dumpster. That's probably your biggest stuff. Everything else in residential is pretty much hand carried. But it's the sheetrock lift that you're gonna get in.
Yeah.
I think we should have an orderly village, but I don't think we should be sitting here talking about punishing people, which is what I
Yeah.
feel like we're doing.
I think you'll have the teeth that you're looking for to prevent some of the things you've bumped into with the way it is right now. That's an interesting one, because that would certainly
That's ideal.
that would
It's
basically
ideal.
put every house in here in Riverside on a fast track schedule, which would probably turn into dollars for the villagers.
Well, I mean, I am suggesting this from experience, and I
like
found
said,
it to be
it would
extremely
be a motivator.
effective.
It would be a motivator, that's for sure.
And I've not gotten any complaints about issues with, exterior work or damage to the property because they're continuing to work on the exterior. Most of the time, they've got the drywall in already, and it's just a lot of, they've got all that, and they're just doing other work on the inside. But if the board doesn't have the appetite for it, you don't want to do, you're okay with the project going 1.5 years on the exterior? I think 1.5 years is too long to finish an exterior of a house.
Yes, ma'am.
Could you create like an economic incentive to the developer to put in the grading for the exterior? And then if they do that first, then they can get a discount of some kind for the construction permit?
What do you think of that idea?
That's the incentive versus de-incentivizing thing.
So, I mean, I suppose we could use that as a way to lessen the required bond if they do that, if they need a.
Why don't we do this, because we have a lot yet to cover.
True.
I don't think at this point there's support for that, Mr.
Right.
Fowler.
No, that's
So
clear.
I would say, let's take this the way we have it, and that's a very interesting idea. And why don't you give some thought to that? If there's, might be a way to accomplish Mr. Pollock's, goal with the carrot rather than the stick.
Right, and I have some discretion in the amount of additional bonding that's required, is the way this is written. I get to determine what the additional bonding is if you're doing a renewal, and I can say, if you get the grading done, I'm willing to reduce this bonding amount to this amount versus that.
That's going to help the most, be empowering these guys to work with somebody that's most likely in a financial bind. I mean, that's usually what drives them to go slow, right? None of us want to go real slow. There's usually somebody driving it.
So, do you just want to run through the changes that we've
Sure.
got before we vote on it?
So we're going to leave the site fencing requirement and the tree fencing requirements the same as are in the current ordinance because Sonia has the discretion on whether to issue a ticket or not, right?
But weren't
For
we
the
gonna?
fencing, no, we wanted
we were
to
gonna give
remove
the option of the
snow
panelized.
fencing altogether.
Well, I thought what we were
We're
trying to
talking
do
about
was
the
give you
adjustments made tonight.
I thought we wanted to give you the discretion as to whether it was posted or panelized.
Yes, but we wanted to make sure that we're still removing the snow fencing, which is
Right.
currently
Yeah, the
written
snow
in there.
fencing.
Right.
going,
Yeah,
but-
I thought that we were gonna leave what is currently being changed in the ordinance as the general rule, with Sonia being given the flexibility to change those requirements if it's needed to either in furtherance of protecting the
Right.
site, unique
That's
site
good.
characteristics,
Right.
Yes.
or to further tree
Yes.
protection.
Okay.
But the general language about what's required as it's
Right.
currently proposed would
Right.
stay the same.
Okay.
So,
But so
and then
wouldn't you just strike the or alternate measures? Must be post-driven or alternate measures? Or must be post-driven or panelized? What's going to be easiest for you to enforce?
Let's let the lawyers figure that out.
Are we going to table this? Is that where you're going?
No, we're going to
okay.
vote on it. I just want everybody to know what's different than what we have in front of us.
So are we going to, do you want it to say panelized then?
Posted or panelized.
Posted or panelized.
Correct?
That's what I would do.
Or panelized with the approval of the,
Well, yeah, we're going to have the approval language in there as
Okay.
well. And then are we going to require screening on the sides?
Yes,
Protect
sides and back.
neighbors?
screen on the sides.
Sides and back, right.
And back, okay. Okay, dumpsters shall be removed in 48 hours, but if they're not removed within 24, the remainder of the periods, they're going to have to be covered until they are removed.
Correct.
And then we're going to take out the specifics of how neighbors are notified and simply have a neighbor notification requirement. That's what I have.
I think that's all I have too. Did we miss anything? No? Okay, with those changes in mind, anything else? Please call the roll.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Powell.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Apt.
Thank you.
Very nicely done. Next up is an ordinance amending sections 225.1 through 225.5 of the Village Code of the Village of Riverside, Illinois, relative to Riverside Cable Commission. Ms. Francis.
Okay, I'll give you a little, very quick background. So prior to 2005, the Riverside Cable Commission was known as Network 10 Commission. The village code was changed at that time due to the changing in the Comcast, changing their local channel from 10 to 6. So the name of the commission was changed to be consistent with the channel change. We then, at that point, named it the Riverside Cable Commission. On April 11th, 2016, the Cable Commission discussed various sections within the village code as it relates to the Cable Commission regarding their name and potentially changing their name. You will note that the various sections of 2-25-1 through 2-25-5, there are changes in which we eliminate cable and replace that with TV. Also the membership, changing that from 5 to 7. And additionally, as it relates to where duties are discussed, adding in access to TV and online video broadcast in various sections as well. This is consistent now with what the role of the Cable Commission is, and they provided the recommended changes that are included within the ordinance.
Ask for a motion and a second to approve.
Motion.
Motion, Mr. Valerie, second by Mr. Lumsden. I just had one question, and maybe you can answer, Mr. Valerie. Why do they want to go from 7 back to 5?
Because they've always had 5. I don't even know when we went to 7.
I think it was just part when we did the
other ones, yeah.
global kind of change.
So we've been at 5. We've been at 5. We're at 5. So.
Any other questions? Please call the roll.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Pollak.
Aye.
Trustee Sedgwick.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton. Aye.
Motion carries. So now we have a list of things we're going to talk about tonight. And first up is a discussion of amending the village code relative to vacation rentals. This is something that came up toward the end of last year when it came to the village's attention that there were some residents that were doing some vacation rentals, and Ms. Apt can fill us in from there.
Yes, last year it came to our attention that property owners in the village were hosting their properties with services such as Airbnb and vacation rental by owner. These services allow property owners to advertise their homes as available for vacation rentals. Our code does not address these types of uses, but it does have regulations related to bed and breakfasts and hotel motels. Vacation rentals are a different model than a bed and breakfast, where these owners may or may not be on the premises during the rental time and typically do not offer meals. The staff believes that these type of uses can have an impact on adjacent properties and should be regulated similar to how we regulate bed and breakfasts. Staff did send notices of violation to those owners who were advertising on Airbnb, that they were not licensed with the village, nor did they have the appropriate zoning for this type of use. Two of those owners did inquire about the village considering amending the ordinance to allow the vacation rentals. The proposed definition for a vacation rental is a dwelling unit or portion thereof offered for rent for a period not to exceed 30 consecutive days to any person other than a member of the owner's family. Vacation rental licensees may but are not required to live in the vacation rental. The term vacation rental shall not include hotels or motels or bed and breakfast establishments. The business license regulations that are before you mimic those for the bed and breakfast that we have in our ordinance. We would be creating a new chapter for vacation rentals, and the regulations would follow the same requirements as a bed and breakfast in regards to insurance, proof of ownership interest, proof of adequate parking, having an initial inspection and subsequent inspections biennially, pardon me, by the Community Development Department and the Fire Department. The Fire Department has been looking into this issue as well, and regarding fire alarm system requirements, and they believe that if a vacation rental would be renting out individual rooms similar to a bed and breakfast, that the fire alarm requirement should be in place. If they're renting out the unit as a whole, then we wouldn't necessarily need to have that requirement. So that if somebody is going to be renting out a room to one family, another room to another family, that we would have the same requirement for a connected fire alarm system that we would for a bed and breakfast or for a hotel or for any of our businesses that are required to have that wired fire alarm connection. So that is their recommendation to us in regards to the fire alarm system requirements. The rental of the vacation rental for a period of shorter than 24 hours or the advertisement of an hourly rate will be expressly prohibited. The proposed license regulations will require our zoning ordinance to be updated as well, similar to bed and breakfasts. So the definition of vacation rental would be added, and the use would be added to the use tables for residential and commercial zoning districts. We are proposing that this would mimic, again, what bed and breakfasts are. So it would be a special use in the residential districts, a permitted use in the commercial districts. We are proposing a new parking requirement for it as well. We would require one parking space plus one parking space per rental unit, or where guest rooms are being made individually rented to different parties, or it would be per guest room. So that would mimic the bed and breakfast language where it requires one per guest room. The Planning and Zoning Commission will need to conduct a public hearing on the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance, and I'm just looking for your input on this, and then we'll move forward with sending this to the Planning and Zoning Commission for them to have their public hearing for the zoning related items.
Why does preservation have to hear it?
Because it's an amendment to the zoning ordinance, and
That's what I think, so they hear it.
yes.
So if a homeowner wishes to obtain a license, they first would have to obtain a special use permit to do this. Is that correct? Which means that then all their neighbors would be advised of their desire to do this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the fee, what's the annual fee? Is that in the fee structure? I don't see a fee.
Yeah, we have it. I mean,
I believe it would be the $100.
Just like the
bed and breakfast and our other business licenses.
I have a couple issues, or a couple thoughts. As a frequent user of Airbnb, I don't understand.
In Riverside?
No. No, but
Hourly?
My son just got back from Costa Rica.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
He loved it, and I use it all the time. It's my go-to. I don't understand the parking requirement. We already have parking requirements as part of our own laws. I think parking requirements, is the responsibility of the Airbnb host to make sure that the person that's coming into town understands that if they are driving into town, that these are the places they can park, but they can't park on the street. They can't park in the front yard. I mean, we already have those rules, so it really doesn't, it just seems like we're making it more onerous, especially being so close to the train tracks. I mean, I would see this as something people may never even, I mean, every Airbnb I've ever used, I've never had a car at. So I thought the parking was, again, taking our rules and doubling it. special use, again, it's a special use. If I want to do it and I live on Delaplane, I have to pay $1,000. All my neighbors, no, if I'm an irresponsible Airbnb owner, my neighbors will know about it. And this village will know about it. And we have rules in here that says if there's complaints, then we have action to be taken. So I would think it'd be something that should be a permitted use. I don't think it should be a special use. I don't think we should have that kind of onerous on it either. This thing with the fire alarm, I've never ever used an Airbnb where multiple families have been in the space at a time. It's either you're renting out, and I've actually never used it where I was in a place where there was even the people that owned it. I either take the entire house or in some cases a guest house or a coach house. So I don't see the fire alarm issues. I think Airbnb is a great thing. I think it's a great thing for the village to get people to come in. And I just don't want it to be too onerous, because that's not the way. That's not the way it was designed, and the people that use it understand what they're doing it, and the people that are Airbnb hosts are usually very, very responsive because they do police themselves. They're very particular on who they take. Every time I've asked to go somewhere, they look at, the past reviews of when I've been there, because everyone writes about how, my behavior. And I also, before I go to a place, and I still get in, by the way. I spend time and read all the reviews about the place that I'm staying at. So, it's pretty much self-policing. So I think we're being a little too restrictive, personally.
I think those are all very good issues that we have to address. I think at this point, we're just deciding whether or not we want to address those issues.
Well, unless there are things in here that you simply don't, like if everybody agrees that we shouldn't have the parking requirement, there's no reason to send that to planning and zoning.
But don't we want?
I want those guys to weigh in on that.
Right.
That's
what I'm saying too.
I want them to weigh in on those things.
Right.
I think the one question I have is, do we require exit signs? The thing that comes into it when you design anything that is a short-term occupancy is, how do you get people safely out in a fire? Mm-hmm. And so because they're not used to that place, right? So when we design buildings, it all depends. If we design student housing and they're going to be there short-term, like summer camps and things like that, there's one level of codes that we have to make sure that we have for exiting and egress, because they're short-term, they haven't figured out where the exits are and all that, like we need exit signs. Do we know, does our bed and breakfast requirement require exit signs?
I believe it does require, bed and breakfast does require exit signs.
Because I think that's where I'd really love Chief Buckley to weigh in on where his position is for not only that. I like the fact we're going to notify them of that so that they could probably go and do the walkthroughs with the firemen, so they know how to get to somewhere if somebody has a heart attack or something like that. Some of those.
That was interesting, because I worked pretty hard on this, and that was the difference in the bed and breakfast, because it usually was multiple rooms. They would have an exit sign and out with the diagram of how to get out. Yeah. But I didn't find an Airbnb or a vacation rental when they had it, which surprised me. Because it seems, I think your point's well taken, that you're somewhere new. You need to know how to get out. So that's probably something.
A lot of times you get there late at night.
Yeah, that's probably something they should take a look at. Yeah.
And then is there any ADA? I mean, how do we handle the ADA stuff? Because I'm assuming some of the facilities that would be operating here, I've never stayed in one, so. Are they handicap accessible? Or?
None that I've ever stayed in.
In someone's house.
Yeah, I never found that either. Yeah. So we're okay with this in terms of sending this on? And to your point, this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about special use fees, because $1,000 for somebody who wants to do something like this, or $1,000 if somebody wants to come in and buy a building, that's a lot of money. And those, as we will talk about, those numbers were pegged to another time, and where there were more costs to the village. So we'll get to that here shortly. So this is okay to send on? Okay.
And the reason we're discussing this is, as this gets sent off to zoning, they understand some of our thoughts. I thought that was the whole idea of this.
Yeah, because we don't ever want to get in a situation again where we're sending them something so nebulous that they don't even know what we're asking them to look at. So hopefully this is tight enough that it'll be a quick discussion. Next up is the great nemesis discussion of variation standards. Who is going to talk about this? Lucky you.
For me. As you know, over the past couple of years, there's been a great deal of discussion about the variation standards in our ordinance and the words undue hardship. At your last meeting, you directed the village attorney and staff to provide information on the state statute regarding variation standards and what other comparable communities utilize as variation standards, and some examples of what an undue hardship is from case law. The trustees, you also stated that you'd like the Planning and Zoning Commission to review possible amendments to those standards at their upcoming meeting and make recommendations, and then they could have a public hearing on those recommendations. So in our zoning ordinance, it states that in specific cases in which there are practical difficulties or particular hardships in carrying out the strict letter of the regulations of this zoning ordinance, the village board shall have the power and duty to determine and vary the application of such regulations in harmony with their general purpose and intent, but only in accordance with the requirements of this section. And that basically comes straight out of the state statute. Further on, it states what the standards for a variation are. And in there we have that the Planning and Zoning Commission shall not recommend varying the provisions of this zoning ordinance as authorized in this section unless it has made the following findings based upon the evidence presented to it. First finding being that the owner of the property in question will suffer undue hardship in the absence of such variation. Second one is that the plight of the owner is due to unique circumstances. And the third standard is that the variation, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. And it says that the variation shall be recommended only if the evidence in the judgment of the commission sustains each of the three conditions enumerated above. Now, the authority says that we're looking at a particular hardship or practical difficulty. Then you have our first standard saying that in order to prove that, your standard is that it will suffer undue hardship. And so you kind of undermine the ability for there to be a practical difficulty by adding that standard in there. So that is kind of, I think, where the hiccup has been with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Village Board, is how those two play out. We have, the state statute says that variations shall be permitted by the Board of Appeals only when they are in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the regulations, and only in cases where there are practical difficulties or particular hardship in the way of carrying out the strict letter of any of those regulations relating to the use, construction, or alteration of buildings or structure, or the use of land. So we have kind of that issue. The village attorney provided you with a memo that also included other villages' standards for variations and what they use. There are some communities out there that use basically the exact same standards that we do. So that is out there. It is one of the more strict ones. And then you have your other communities out there that kind of take out that wording of undue hardship and use practical difficulties, particular hardship, and some of the other standards that we have that you're supposed to use to inform whether those three findings are being made. And that talks about things about the particular physical surroundings, shape, or topographical conditions of the specific property involved will bring a particular zoning hardship upon the owners as distinguished from a mere inconvenience. That the conditions upon which the petition for variation is based would not be applicable generally to other properties within the same zoning classification. That the purpose of the variation is not based exclusively on a desire to achieve a higher profit off of the property. That the alleged difficulty or hardship has not been created by any person presently having an interest in the property. And that the granting of the variation will not be detrimental to the public welfare or unduly injurious to other property improvements in the neighborhood. And that the proposed variation will not impair adequate supply of light and air to the adjacent property or increase danger of fire or otherwise endanger the public safety or the property values of the surrounding properties. So those are fairly typical standards that you see in a lot of the other communities. as well, and some of them talk about undue hardship, some of them do not use that wording at all in their standards. So that's kind of some of the other things that you can look at and how you want to go with dealing with those standards that we have.
If I can, before we open it up, just for the benefit of folks here at home, our village attorneys did provide us a really great memo with this, and I think there's a few sentences that are worth hearing, and this is from Mr. Mars. It says, one of the unusual things about the variation standards in Riverside is that although the overarching standard is whether there is a practical difficulty or particular hardship, that's in the state statute, the very first finding that the Planning and Zoning Commission must make is that there is an undue hardship. By making hardship a standalone finding that must be made, the term practical difficulty becomes moot. If there is no hardship, there can be no variation. And that is where we have hung up repeatedly. So that...
Yeah, and again, I'll be very transparent about my motive. It's to get it so that homeowners can do projects that they really want to do, and our code can remain as strict as possible so that we have a chance to talk about it, so we have a chance of people to consider the issues. And so I'm of the position I want to have our codes be pretty restrictive, but our variance policy help us to be very neighborly. Right? And again, because ultimately I think that currently the way our code is right now, we are driving tear downs and big box homes on sites, which is kind of contrary to what I think all the codes are really trying to do, is to keep this really kind of diverse home neighborhood. So I think all the best intentions sometimes, are going punished in this case, because it's really, really hard as a creative architect to adaptively reuse the capital that people have already invested in to bring them up to modern standards and give them that. And so we can have fresh people move into town and spend their money at our businesses and things like that, right? And if we don't become a little more creative and loosen up on, again, I don't want to loosen up on the codes, because we got to keep a tight net on it so we have the chance to have the dialogue by the people that are brilliant at doing this. And our P&Z group is a really good group of people. Yeah. And I trust them. But we do have their hands tied right now.
I agree.
One sentence that I saw repeated in several of our neighbor cities that I would look to see how they do things, that I think is really important for us, is the variation, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. That's what we're after. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right, Mr. Lumsden, that the having big box houses take the place of some of the housing that we have that's part of the charm of our community, just because they can do it and our remodels can't, is, I won't use the word, but it's backwards. Something that begins with an A backwards.
We're gonna lose those wonderful little bungalows over a period of time, because the market is going to drive for a developer not to do an adaptive reuse because of hardship proving problems. And then their next best thing is for the family to move to somewhere else that they can get the comforts that they want, and then a developer buy it and build a big box because that's your best profit margin right now.
And the way it's currently written, it's like a catch-22. You have to prove a hardship, but you can't prove a hardship, but you have to prove a hardship, but you can't prove a hardship, so.
Other comments?
I also liked River Forest has minor and major variations, and I like that idea that there are some that can be easier dealt with given certain restrictions.
That's common, to have minor and major. Some can be approved by staff.
Right.
And if you drive around River Forest, they've been able to maintain quite a bit of adaptive reuse to give people the opportunity to do it. If you go by, you can see when people are doing facade renovations.
Putting aside the specific general question about practical difficulties and undue hardship, the River Forest's history of variations is tied to if someone is needing a variation, a setback or whatever, in order to maintain the architectural integrity of a building line if they're going back because it's a smaller house. They have historically been sympathetic to that variation, because to not be does create an incentive to do a tear down, because otherwise you're spending your money and you have to have this weird inset because the house was built before the setback. You know, there's a lot of old housing stock like here. Many of the houses were prior to the greater setback requirements that they have now. So that, and also preservation of trees, has been an important concept related to variation.
Yeah, I like that too with her, of course. The one that I also thought was really, I love the simplicity of the Clarendon Hills.
Me too.
It was very straightforward, and I like that they led off with the practical difficulties, particular hardship, and then used the other two criteria as kind of subsidiary to that. So, my suggestion would be that our Planning and Zoning Commission could take a look at all these and create the best of the bunch. Mr. Palmer, I know you know a lot about this. What do you think?
Well, I really, quite honestly, don't really know the difference between practical difficulty and undue hardship. We don't have to discuss it tonight. Maybe that as we go through this process, we can discuss it. But to me, I really don't know that there's any really substantive difference there.
I mean, I can tell you what I think from, and the attorney can do better than I can, but my understanding is that the undue hardship criteria historically in terms of case law has fallen into runs with the land, so that you're really looking almost at kind of mathematical determinations, which I have not seen in the practical difficulty part. Why don't you know?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I mean, as the memo points out, the one issue you have now is you say undue hardship or practical difficulties, and then you have as an element you must prove undue hardship. So it's sort of, there's an inconsistency here.
Could you give us an example of a practical difficulty that's not an undue hardship?
Well, let's go back a little further because of something that I think President Sells said. The one thing that is true is that whether you're talking about practical difficulty or undue hardship or anything else related to variations, is historically the one thing that you're always looking at is the permanent either land historically in its earliest sense or more recently structures that are the equivalent of being part of the land, either because it's older housing stock or they're mature trees. And almost exclusively practical difficulties are not, I live here and I have a lot of children, so I want this variation. Historically, that's never been how variations are considered because they aren't supposed to be based on the existing and current user of the property, rather than this is the way this lot and the house and whatever are going to be. So the expansion I've seen, at least where it's been very thoughtful, like where you're really trying to follow the original concept of variations, it's always tied to something permanent and not related to the whims or desires of the current user. Having said that, my experience has been that boards are all over the place on what they actually do. And one of the big things, I think Trustee Hamilton brought it up, is a big factor in all variations historically are this detrimental effect, because how is that best going to be proved or disproved? By whether the neighbors complain, really. And so whether it's tied to your sort of a hardship or whatever, historically boards are much more sympathetic to variations if their neighbors aren't complaining, or even better, if they support it and say, if this variation is granted, it's going to be better for me. Those are the ones that really are a sell for a board, because they listen to the public and they've got everybody interested right there, and they're saying, this is fine. In those cases, a lot of this, is this an undue hardship? A lot of it, in my experience, kind of goes out the window because of everybody's happy, right? So I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, is whether neighbors are complaining and whether it does in some way relate to the land or the house or the things that are different from, I live here, I'm a car collector, so I want an oversized driveway, or I build model. I have a woodworking set, or, you know, my hobby is something, so I want to forge, you know. And those typically are not considered really variation material. But again, it does depend on some of these other things. And
What is a practical difficulty then? It's not a hardship, maybe I didn't understand.
oh,
your
okay, I
explanation.
didn't answer that.
Nice dodge.
Okay, an undue hardship is, I would say, where you have a lot that has a creek running through it, and there are setback requirements. And realistically, for you to build a house on that property, it would be, on the first floor would have to be 800 square feet. And it's a fairly big lot. And so it's an undue hardship because of what you paid for a lot, like what anybody would pay for a lot in the town. You really can't build a marketable house. And so to me, that's a hardship because your neighbors have an opportunity that you can't even come close to because of something that just is flowing through, and that clearly the general rules of setback and zoning couldn't have taken into account because it's unique to that lot or series of lots. So that's a hardship. A practical difficulty to me is something that isn't necessarily related to being able to get a minimum size house on the property. It's a practical difficulty. Okay, I want to do an addition to this house, and I don't want to tear down the house, but in order to meet the setback requirement, I think it would look bad because I've got to do this weird little jog in to meet, because the new part has to meet the setback. I'm grandfathered on the old, and it's not a tremendous hardship. I can do it. I can have the space I need. I can have, my architect can work around it. But I don't think it's going to look good, and my neighbors don't think it's going to look good. We all think, and it won't meet the architectural lines, but it's what the law says. That to me is more of a practical difficulty.
But to be clear, I'm sorry, Trustee Bell, just finishing this line of thought.
Please do.
But to be clear, practical difficulty is not, I'm a woodworker, so I want to have woodworking equipment somewhere that I couldn't otherwise have it. I mean, let's be clear.
You know, the way the case law, none of it is based on the idiosyncrasies of the current occupant.
And I agree with that, and I think it goes back to how Trustee Pollack brought this up. To me, it's a very, very narrow difference between the two definitions, and I think that's good, but I think it's not broadening or liberalizing the decision-making that much by including both of those terms.
My understanding before was always, we were saying that the undue hardship was only the land, where now you're saying practical difficulty includes the house stock, which to me is a huge difference.
I think we had talked about that once before. I had brought those up, that because historically, again, if you look at the original concept of what you want from the whole idea of grandfathering, is the philosophy 100 years ago was not really to value, unless there was George Washington slept here or something, was not to keep old housing stock that wasn't compliant. The goal was to extinguish it, get it built, and get a new structure in compliance. And I think there's been a huge sea change in the way people think about that.
I think
so we treat our houses more as part of the lot now.
I think it's a very good explanation, and I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that an undue hardship means that the zoning is preventing any reasonable use of the property. The creek that runs through it, and you can't build a house on it because the creek prevents you from making a reasonable use of the property that everyone else in the neighborhood can make use of the property. Practical difficulty, on the other hand, just means that, yeah, you technically could still build on the property or make reasonable use of the property, but it's a little bit more difficult because of the zoning ordinance and, as you said, these nuanced things about preserving a house and things like that. So I think, is that a fair?
Yeah.
I
think that's right.
So I wanted to kind of, though, if I can, take this in a slightly different direction, because the hardship, practical difficulty thing is just one aspect of a variation. It's not even the most significant. I think there are other equally significant aspects of granting a variation. The uniqueness, the compatibility, or how it impacts the neighborhood. the way I've always preferred to think about variations is to ask myself, this homeowner's asking to do something by variation that if we let him do it, we're still going to continue to tell everybody else in town you can't do that. So we're going to grant you this building height variation, but we still feel like no one else should be allowed to do this unless they can prove this hardship or practical difficulty. So I always ask myself, how do I explain to everyone else in town why we let him do it, but we're not letting you do it? And so that comes back to the land and the practical difficulty. Well, it's because he had an historic house that we wanted preserved. And the only way to preserve it and to make it, for historic preservation was to grant this variation. Or he had this beautiful, three beautiful trees, oak trees on the property that were healthy. And if we made him comply with the code, he would tear those trees down. And I could explain that to my neighbors. I could say, that's why we let him do it, because of those unique circumstances. And that's a hardship to make him tear down those trees or to tear down the house and build a new house when we want the house preserved. So I think it's really important to think about the fairness issue here. Are we being fair to everyone else? Now, if you look at a variation, you say, yeah, we should let him do it, and yeah, we should let everyone else do it, well, then we should do a text amendment. Because the variation process is not a design review process. It's not a process where, oh, well, let's just, everybody who asks for a variation, as long as we like it, we'll approve it. It's not that. That's dangerous. You're going to have an arbitrary zoning ordinance. Everybody's going to apply their own criteria to it. It's a design review process. I don't think we want that. So we've got to think about that fairness. Why would we, when you look at the variation, what's unique about this circumstance that we want to say yes to this person, but we're going to continue to say no to everyone else? And hardship is just part of that, but the uniqueness of the land and how it fits in with the neighborhood are co-equal parts of that, I think.
And if I just want to follow up, because I had actually circled that very thing. One of the things in the memo that our current zoning ordinance specifically calls out that the Planning and Zoning Commission can look at is that the conditions upon which the petition for variation is based would not be applicable generally to other property in the same zoning district. And we had, and this kind of goes back to something Mr. Molina said a minute ago. We just had that variation request where the neighbors supported it, and yet you would be hard pressed to find a way to tell somebody else that they couldn't do exactly what you wanted to do, except for the historical component.
Right.
So the historical component, limiting it to being an open porch, was the distinguishing factor. To take the next step to enclose it, then how do you tell the next person with the porch that they can't do the same thing? So this is always the difficult part about those things. And I think that's an excellent point. The only other thing that I would add that I do really like about ours is that we specifically call out that the purpose of the variation is not based exclusively upon a desire to achieve higher profit from the property. I think that is almost universally supported by case law, that wanting to have a more expensive house doesn't get you there.
But you might want to have a house that has fair market value.
Yes.
Because we have many lots that are difficult to build on and difficult to, put an addition on or modify your house to keep up with the current market. And I think that you could be put in a position of having hardship or difficulties by not being able to get a variance if you wanted to expand.
Sir, you want to comment? Please.
Cubs are going there.
He got to know it.
We got it?
Mike's over there watching me.
I just heard it.
We're going to disconnect the internet in this room during the meeting.
Larry Speska, 241 Gage. I was looking through some zoning code variations, and I came across Glen Ellen, and they had a statement in there. It wasn't in the packet. I didn't have time to read the agenda items that you had on there. But what they said in here, that variation is not unique or changes the essential character of the area. The petitioner should seek an amendment to the zoning code that would then apply throughout the district rather than a variation. I would just like to encourage the building department to encourage residents that if they don't qualify for a variation, to seek a text amendment. That was never brought up to me as an option. And if that was brought up as an option, maybe you'd spend a lot less time on variations. They also have under there, the power of variances is to be sparingly exercised and only in rare instances and under exceptional circumstances peculiar in their nature and with due regard to the main purpose of a zoning ordinance to preserve the property rights of others. So I think sometimes we're looking at the burden of proof. You should be considering whether or not it's adversely affecting the neighbors. I think that's more important than actually having a hardship. If it's that, I watched the meeting from 2 weeks ago, and that I would call it a porch addition. I thought it was a nice addition, looked good, complimented the neighbors' houses. Did it qualify for an undue hardship? No. But should they be able to build it? Why not? So, and there was one other one I came across. This was in Nebraska. This was Rousseau versus the Zoning Board of Appeals in Omaha. And it was interesting, Article 2, and if you want these, I can have them to cruise through them. But they found the density of the neighborhood to be a hardship. So that's not unique to the property. That's the problem in the area. Whereas in my case, we have parking issues. The cars are on the driveways, and that's similar to density. So that's my 2 comments.
Yeah, if you could.
Sure.
Thank you very much. So, are we anything else on this?
I think, again, this is just ideas that we want planning and zoning to hear. I think they're very well aware of the issues.
And this is clear enough for you to take the planning and zoning with what we've said?
Plus, they can have the YouTube link so they can watch it themselves.
And I will provide them with that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this is a very important and difficult area, so I'm glad we're doing this.
Thank you for pulling all this together.
Next up is a discussion of zoning fees, which kind of dovetails into a lot of what we were talking about earlier tonight. Is this also? You get to do this.
Yes, we're switching. I'm giving her a break. And this is just very high level. It was brought to our attention that perhaps we wanted to discuss the zoning fees. So you'll notice in the agenda history sheet, we've pulled the zoning fees reference from the village code as it relates to variation for residential is 500, variation for commercial is 1,000 plus some additional fees. Text amendment residential is 1,000. Text amendment for commercial is 3,000, special use is 1,000, and subdivision is 2,000. Also, it should be noted that, and these are just for the application fees, it should be noted that the code was modified in July of 2015, this particular section, to include the following language. In addition to zoning fee, a plan review fee will be imposed when applicable to defray the costs of contracting with independent professionals to review zoning applications for compliance with applicable codes. And then it references the subsections for professional fees. And the purpose for these fees, as they were outlined previously, and they were, once again, application fees, they weren't necessarily deposits, was to recover the cost that the village, any direct costs, rather, that the village has in relation to these particular requests. And they're outlined with the recoverable costs in addition to these fees. So this item is just for discussion, and then with any direction from the village board, then staff would then work on preparing a code modification.
So I asked this to be put on, so I'll tell you where I'm coming from on all this. I think that we all agree that in terms of fees like this, we want to make sure that we recoup the cost to the village, both in terms of money and time. But I don't think fees should be, a profit center. I don't think we should be making money off of fees. And when I see things like some of these I think are arbitrary. I mean, if you look at a variation residential versus a variation commercial, why are we charging a business more than we're charging a residence? A text amendment, if somebody comes in and asks for a text amendment, and it turns out that they're right, well, then that was something wrong with the code to start with.
I agree with that.
So why should they be paying anything at all? And then with regard to the special use, I mean, to require somebody who's looking at buying a building or somebody who wants to start a business, $1,000 up front, that they don't know if they're going to win, just seems onerous to me. I mean, my understanding is that now that we're doing the notification primarily through the paper and all, that our costs are around $400 for the notification cost.
Can confirm how much
Yeah.
the costs are.
Right, I mean, it's going to depend on how long of a notice it is, but for the larger notices, it can run upward of $400. Typically, you're seeing in the $200 to $250 range for the publication of the notice, and then you have the mailing requirements. We did remove the certification requirement, or certified mailing requirement, from the variation standard, and then we just removed it from the subdivision requirement with our subdivision code update. So that has lessened the amount. Previously, we had always had a court reporter for every public hearing. So that was part of the fee, was to recoup that cost of having the court reporter there. Now we don't have the court reporter there anymore. We're doing the Riverside TV. So that is offsetting some of those costs as well.
Well, there's a cost of Riverside TV because we're paying that personnel cost.
And thank you for using the name Riverside TV.
We are very adaptable.
I mean, from my standpoint, I would be more inclined to make them all $500, especially since we have the recouping capability of the, if we actually expend money. And I don't like that we penalize commercial uses. I don't know why we would charge $1,000 for a text a minute residential and $3,000 for a commercial. I mean, that just seems like we're going to a pocket and I don't like it.
I have no problem with what you're saying, as long as we're recouping our cost. But I mean, your starter thing is how does this necessarily, by reducing the cost is the fair thing to do, I agree with you, but how does this speed up the process and take care of special use? You still has to, I mean, in Mr. Barr's case, he still has to, the client still has to come through with special use.
Right.
So, I mean, there's...
Well, the answer to that was his other suggestion, is we go back and we look whether we want to make some of the things that we currently may have special uses, permitted uses. Another possibility would be to grant this kind of decision-making authority to staff.
Or change the zoning of the property.
But in terms of Mr. Barr's situation, no matter what we do, his time frame is going to be the same.
Right.
Because even if we wanted to change things tonight, it's still going to take the same amount of time that it would take to go through the special use process.
I'm just saying in the future.
You need to go up to that.
Tom Barr, 43 is Quincy. Yeah, I do think, and certainly I've been reviewing this, looking at your discussions that you're having on variances. Really, looking at the very, very limited uses that you currently have for mixed-use periphery, it means almost anything that anybody would want to do would actually require that somebody come in for a special use permit. And given where it was before, really, again, if I would have known what I know now a couple of years ago when we first were looking to put the building up for sale, I would have came in here and talked to everybody and say, hey, look at, all this special use stuff, it really needs to be permitted use. And to get around all this stuff that you guys are talking about with variances and things like that, because the variance procedure, or even the special use procedure, should be in situations where it's special. Whereas really when you look at this mixed-use periphery situation, it really should be permitted uses. And that's really what, and to keep in mind what they were trying to do even when they expanded the area, so.
I mean, that's really not exactly on point of what we're talking about tonight, but I think, and like, as you said, that was kind of before our time. Well, no, but it's important because we just had a situation, if the prior person that was interested in your property, we had a resident that was strongly opposed to the idea of having that kind of business in that property. And I think it's fair to say that that's what the prior boards had in mind in terms of making this a special use, is to give the board the opportunity to kind of police the kind of business that's going to come in abutting the residential area.
Right.
I think that's the reason.
Right, but if you go and look at it, I mean, what originally was allowed on that property, and really what the concept was of what they were trying to do to expand it, many of the uses like professional offices, doctor offices, a lot of the other things that are all special use, really could very easily be permitted uses and keep with the spirit of it, and really probably allow a situation where those areas could expand possibly much more feasibly. The whole requirement of, like, for example, if you don't use it for a year, it's got to go back we go again. Because again, they're using it for basically the same thing I was using it for. But now it's back again to be looked at. I know you guys, I don't want to take up too much of your time on this.
No, it's a good discussion to have. I mean, I think it's an important discussion to have. But tonight we're just talking about the money part, and I believe that this is an area that we can actually handle just by motion, correct?
Yes.
In terms of if we wanted to reduce the fees in the manner in which I was suggesting. So what does everybody think about where I'm at with this? Yes, sir.
I'm fine with it, but I would also reduce the residential variation fee to about half, $250. The reason I say that is, I know some people view that as you're encouraging people to file variations, and that may be, but we still have the right to deny them. And if someone does have, if a homeowner has a legitimate hardship, they shouldn't have to pay a whole lot to get relief, I guess.
I agree, but on the other hand, I mean, the minimum I'm hearing is $400 just to do the notification.
Our cost?
Yeah, but and any time we have these variations or these things, the costs of just the notification and all of this stuff is a small, minute piece of the cost. When I go through some of the legal bills, $400 doesn't cover very much. So, I mean, if we reduce that to $250, I'm now paying for your variation, and that's basically what you're getting down to. I think I don't think $500 really covers the cost of a variation by any stretch of the imagination, but be it residential or be it commercial. By any stretch of the imagination. I bet you a lot of times $1,000 doesn't cover it. But I'm willing to go along with the reduction of these fees, but to a point.
I just think we have to be fiscally responsible and recoup what we have. Again, you guys need to tell me what it's actually costing us. I mean, even, because some of them are bigger, right? But we have the opportunity to recoup it, right? If we end up having a text amendment in it, and we end up having the legal spend a bunch of time on it to get the wording right and everything, do we have a chance to recoup that? If it's not specifically an error or, something.
That's a good point. I mean, could attorney's fees be included under professional fees?
It is under recoverable costs.
It's listed?
What? Yeah.
Yes.
But even in terms of like a residential?
It's under recoverable costs, so, yeah.
Legal review.
But this refers to plan review.
It's commercial, that's what I'm referring to.
They could be recoverable.
Not under the language we have now, because this is just talking about plan review.
No, I understand. Right.
I mean, we could do that.
I meant legally they're recoverable, not, I understand.
I mean, that might be a nice compromise, that we go to 500.
We have a fiscal responsibility to recoup, otherwise, we could have a whole bunch of frivolous.
Because we've had some, I mean, in the last year, we've had some very expensive.
I agree with that, but it's unquantifiable, and it's not fair to have the residents sign up for an unquantifiable cost. And ironically, a successful text amendment would cost a lot of money, and the resident probably shouldn't even pay anything for that, because that's something. So I think, for better or for worse, it should be a flat amount. I don't think we need to be too aggressive in reducing that, because it also funds our community development staff, and it should. That's cost.
Yeah, see, that's where I'm not quite sure. What do you mean when you say it funds, pays for the time?
There is revenue generated by the community development area, and that helps pay for the costs of staff.
But shouldn't that revenue come from building fees and things like that as opposed to variance applications?
I think that the staff probably spends more time on the variance issues, so that should.
I just think that philosophically, though, for someone to request, and especially with the text amendment, for someone to request a review of an ordinance that is inappropriate and ask them to pay for it, I just think philosophically is wrong. As opposed to a building fee, which I can explain that makes sense. You're paying for it. We have costs involved. You're going to help supplement those costs.
I think too, we maybe add some perspective to this. How many of these types of requests we have a year? 2 variations maybe?
I would say most of our applications have been Village of Riverside initiated.
Right.
For
So
text amendments.
we are losing money on them, there's no question about it, but we're talking a few $1,000s, not tens of thousands of dollars, for what that's worth. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I just...
How many
throw it
special
out
use
there.
requests have we had in the last 12 months? 2? So it doesn't seem like it's that big of an issue.
It's a big issue if you're one of the 2 people paying $1,000. That's my point.
Well, I think you need to be serious about it too.
Well, but that's where my head was going just now. Is like, how do we keep, just frivolous submissions?
So you think 500 is too low?
I don't know.
I just don't think.
No, I agree. I think
it's too low, but we're splitting hairs now. I know maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 750, but we're splitting hairs. But
I think there needs to be something that makes it a valid, somebody's doing this because they really need, or they want something, we need to recoup the cost from a fiduciary responsibility perspective. I certainly don't want to be using it as a profit center. I mean, our staff costs are kind of already built into our staff cost, right? And so, especially on the text amendment one is the one I really scratch my head. I mean, we're trying to promote movement, right? And betterment of properties.
I mean, I would suggest that we try the 500 and see, see how things go over the next year or 2. If it turns out that we're not getting there, then we can always go back and.
Are you talking about the text amendment?
I'd make them all 500. I'd make 500 all the way through.
Including subdivisions?
Because we have the site plan review, right? That one that apply to the subdivisions.
I mean, do we think the text amendment or the special use, do we think this is hurting business from coming into town? Do we have the right to, does the village manager have the right to, if a particular business was coming into town, it was part of our CMAP initiative, does she have the right to waive that fee?
That's another route we could go.
So, I mean, I think that's where we should be looking at this. Because, nothing costs us less than $1,000. This meeting cost us more than $1,000. Nothing costs us less than $1,000. It really doesn't. And I understand the fairnesses, but and the economies of scales that we do today, that things are less. But it's at the end of the day, nothing costs us less than $1,000.
So you would raise their residential variation to 1,000?
I don't know if I would raise the residential variation, but I would do the special use for businesses that those fees can be waived if they fall within our CMAP initiative.
Other than our direct costs, because that's what the resolution says.
There you go.
So you want to leave the variation residential at 5 and make everything else 1,000 and give that discretion to the
That's what
manager?
I
think that's a good compromise.
Or the lesser of 1,000 in actual cost.
We won't know the actual cost until.
Well, but that's actually an
But you
interesting
take the
thing,
1,000, if it costs $100,
then
you
you
get the
refund
money
it.
back.
Right.
And there is a refund.
Because then the person that comes in here knows what their upset limit is.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a X number
not
of
gonna be
dollar
more
risk
than
for
that.
me to do. I'm good
And
with
by
that.
the way, it's going to cost us a lot more than that probably anyway. So.
Yeah, I could live with that.
Well, that means paragraph 5 would have to be amended, because right now we say the $1,000 fee is non-refundable.
I would.
Do you want staff to think about this and bring it back to us?
I would.
Instead of splitting hairs, trying to figure this out right here.
And then we're revisiting it again. I think Why don't we go with 1,000 across the board and change it from non-refundable to refundable? The lesser of 1,000 or actual cost.
Do you want to make it more of a deposit base?
It's basically
Other than
a
the
deposit.
$500 for the residential?
It's essentially what it is, it's a deposit. That's what I would propose.
That's a
I
nice
don't,
idea.
rather than having it wait another 2 weeks and put it on the agenda and talk about it again, I'd put that.
You like that approach?
I think.
As long as those costs include legal fees, all our fees.
It's going to be on the agenda.
Well, but to Mr. Sevy's point, how do you quantify which part of those legal fees is being driven
Well,
by
the
applicant or-
lesser of, I think we can get a good estimate of costs, a fair estimate of
We
costs.
need to get an ordinance. It could be on the consent agenda.
It'll still be, just for the record, it will still be on the next agenda. You can put it on the consent, but there is a code modification that needs to be done. in
So we gotta talk
ordinance.
about it anyway.
Not
don't
necessarily.
have to talk about it.
Consideration
Well,
anyway.
okay.
Yeah, you don't.
Well, we'll see once it's drafted.
Well, but well, which is a
Let's
good
talk
thing,
about it.
which is a good thing. But you don't have anything in ordinance form before you
Right,
tonight.
right,
That's why.
you're right, we're not voting on it.
Okay,
I'm
so
not
we're double-
I'm not really excited about increasing anything, but I
Yeah.
certainly have no issues with reducing it.
Okay, so we're on the same page. Does that give you enough guidance to?
So we're gonna go with 1,000,
Deposit
but it's
basis.
deposit based, but in no event to exceed.
Right, correct.
Okay, and last but not least, it's a discussion of business development on Harlem Avenue. Ms. Francis.
Okay, over the
Thank
past
you, Ms. Ed.
Over the past few years, the village focused on economic development within the central business district. This endeavor began with the CMAP plan and implementing recommendations as outlined within the plan. Recently, the village undertook steps to attract and incent new businesses to the village. These include changes to zoning throughout the village's business district and waiving certain permit fees within the central business district. The CMAP plan in recent discussions narrowly focused on the CBD and did not address Harlem Avenue. Over the past few months, staff has received a number of inquiries about the village's plan to address the vacant storefronts along Harlem Avenue. Currently, there are a number of storefronts that are vacant and 2 properties are currently listed for sale. From a staff perspective, we want to increase our revenue and property tax base while decrease the number of vacant storefronts. To date, the village has not offered any incentives to attract new businesses or developers to that area. Currently, staff has no tools available to attract development or incent new businesses to Harlem Avenue. Staff proposes that the board discuss the following options for Harlem Avenue, and they are: offer building permit fee waivers for new businesses, similar to what had been approved for the central business district. Evaluate property tax incentives offered by Cook County for new businesses, and also the village would need to consider if they're willing to write a letter of support for a developer in that particular, for that particular incentive. Evaluate opportunities for business district on Harlem Avenue, and offer incentives for developers. And this item is for discussion only, and to provide guidance to village staff.
So, I mean, that sums it up. We've really been focusing pretty heavily on the CBD. I mean, my thought is that the incentives that we're willing to offer within our central business district would be incentives that we should be willing to offer people in the peripheral areas. Probably one of the biggest ideas that we're talking about here is this potential creation of a business district along some portion of Harlem Avenue. And Mr. Molina, maybe you could just generally explain the concept of a business district for us.
The concept is to create a legally described area within a community where there is a finding that it needs help basically to develop. The business district concept provides with a blight finding, you can impose a 1% tax within it, like to pump back into the area. It also, the blight finding supports the use of eminent domain as a proper public purpose if it's desired that that's needed in order to change ownership or in order to get the property redeveloped. It also allows some flexibility for cleaning up environmental conditions. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't put money in your pocket the way a TIF district does, but it creates options that are this gives you more tools in the toolbox. I know that I was involved in a River Forest business district that ultimately it appeared to play some role in helping that development go forward.
What's the downside? Is there any?
Well, the expense, I suppose. You need some factual findings in order to support the necessary underlayment to create the business district. I don't think there are many more downsides to it. It's not as powerful a tool as, say, a TIF. So, I don't see much downside. The upside is the public notice it brings. It may help you create some developer attraction to the area by having it out there as a business district that's defined. You'll be able to, post it as a key area. But I don't see much in the way of downsides. If anybody could criticize anything about it, it's that it should, it's not powerful, especially for a non-home rule community, because you can't float bonds as needed in order to create, leverage in order to get property to move.
And what's the attractiveness of it to a developer? I mean, how does, other than just shining a spotlight on it,
well,
what is it that makes it something the developer?
The eminent domain is very important to a developer, because without that, if the property, even if it's vacant, there would be, if the purpose is to enter a development agreement to flip the property to a developer, you'd have a real issue under current eminent domain statute regarding whether it's an appropriate public purpose. Because, and so with the business district, it creates a strong legal presumption, because of the criteria that are needed to be met, that is a proper purpose, public purpose, even though the village may never really own it for more than, a short period of time, and it'll be flipped to private ownership again. But the business district and its goal of creating this blighted area and to improve it is deemed a sufficient public purpose.
This is not the same as an enterprise zone, though, right?
No, that's different. That's different and much more difficult.
Yeah.
There's the actual statutory,
Right.
yeah, that's different. And that's a more powerful tool.
Yes.
So in terms of timing, though, this is something that I really don't understand about it. I mean, what is the benefit of a municipality moving forward in the first instance with setting up a business district versus sending out an RFP and asking for developers to come look at a particular, parcels, and then if they're interested in a business district, then the village entering that, because there is we know that there's the cost is in the $10,000 to $15,000 range.
You
right?
could definitely,
To have the findings of fact
Right.
and all that you're talking about.
You could definitely do it that way. There's no problem with that. The only downside is delay. The idea is you could be pretty sure that if you're getting RFPs from a developer for a given area, that they're probably going to want you to have eminent domain authority, because they're going to be at a spot if you're not. Their development agreement is going to require them to obtain property, and if there's nothing that's going to force the issue, they're going to be reticent to enter into a development agreement. Almost every development agreement has that. So you can be fairly certain. Not that they're going to want the village to use it, but they're going to want the village to have the ability to use it to make sure they can acquire the property.
So the 1% tax that the village would be, and that's optional. That's
Correct,
up to us
completely
whether we
optional.
want.
And so you probably wouldn't do that anyway right away, because there's not much to impose it on right now.
And my thoughts on that would be, it creates additional taxing power that we can, of course, decide to rebate, but when it's successful in the future, it might be an additional source of revenue.
Well, that was where my question was going. It's a sales tax.
Yes.
So does it have to go back into the business district, Or is that something that long-term eventually just inures to the general fund?
You know, there are some limitations I'd have to check, but I don't know that it has to be pumped back into the business, at least permanently.
And we've got several portals into town that are on Harlem Avenue, so I think and we've had multiple people come to us and write to us that have said, hey, why are you forgetting about Harlem Avenue, right? So I think we have to look at it as okay, what can we do? What are the things we can do? This seems like a relatively economical first step to tee up the opportunities to incentivize some development over there.
Ms. Collins?
We're talking about Harlem Avenue, but what part of Harlem Avenue are we talking about? Are we defining that?
Well, I mean, the most obvious one right now, I think, is the one at Harlem and Long Common, because we have that little strip mall that's been sitting there, partially rented for a long time. The dry cleaner, is for sale. Title Max, they have walked away from the building. Our understanding is that they're trying to sell their lease. They've got 2.5 years remaining. But so eventually that building presumably would also, become open. I mean, if you're, and to Mr. Lunson's point, if you're going to look at that area, it probably would make sense then to cross Long Common and pick up the Marathon
But
property.
my point is, we're not
entry.
talking about Harlem Avenue up by Burlington, and we're not talking about that section of Harlem Avenue.
There aren't any. I mean, there's nothing for sale there
Right.
now. I mean, the only viable spot right now, I think, is that spot there in Harlem and Long Common, because it's. I mean, if we had an opportunity to cooperate with the developer to get those 3 parcels together, I mean, that's really kind of a once in a generation kind of opportunity to get those 3 parcels, at once. You probably remember there was interest a few years back by Starbucks in that corner property where it used to be Sara Lee, now it's the Title Max, and then they stopped building. So, but there seems to be, we had some consultants come in years ago that were working with Costco, and you really almost need all 3 of them to make it work. To have the sufficient parking for that you would need.
Parking and turn lane challenges because of the IDOT requirements.
So
I think it's important to be clear, we're not talking about residential areas of Harlem Avenue. We're talking about commercial, truly blighted areas. And I think it would be the opinion of a vast majority of residents that they are blighted. I think we've quoted, former President Stack a number of times in saying when you tell people how to get to your house, you say, take a ride at the abandoned liquor store, and that's a problem. That really is a problem. So I think that that's something we need to be aggressive with.
Other thoughts? Everybody shaking their head yes. It seems like an agreement here.
So in anticipation of this meeting and this discussion, I did reach out to individual or 2 parties that would be able to facilitate this process moving forward if the board was interested. One quote was $10,000, up to $10,000. The other one was up to $18,000. So it is within my authority to sign off on it, but I obviously wanted to ensure that this is the direction the board wanted to go.
Mr. Molina, I had a question with that too. I mean, why? I mean, these findings of fact ultimately are made by the board, right?
Correct. That is
Why do we need a consultant to tell us what we already know?
Well, you would presumably know them because of the basis that a consultant would give you in looking at would know the standard of, say, blighted area in comparison with other communities. Similar to saying, you may have a feel for what property is worth in town because you live here, but that may not hold up if you have to give expert testimony about, comparables and things like that. Yet you might really have a good feel for it and be right on the money. So looking at it strategically, this business district is challengeable, but it's challengeable for a given period of time. And the one who would challenge it would be similar to probably the someone objecting to eminent domain authority as being an improper public use, which in an eminent domain proceeding is called a traverse motion. It's where you attack the viability of eminent domain, not the price. You're saying this is an improper use of the procedure. So somebody could challenge the business district based on the accuracy of the blight findings. And you'd have to provide testimony. Now, if you don't think anybody's going to object, you can take a strategic risk of passing an ordinance. But again, you know, you're going to be having whereas clauses that would actually require you to be the witnesses, as opposed to saying we relied on somebody. So
Jessica,
That's a good answer.
Who are the two consultants?
I received a quote from Ellers and the other one from Kane McKenna.
So are we interested in letting staff proceed on this at the lower cost? Yes? Okay. Is there any new business this evening? We do have need for an executive session to discuss the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body. So I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene. No final action will be taken. Motion by Mr. Lumsden. Second by Ms. Collins. Please call the roll.
Trustee Bowden.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Trustee Sedley.
Aye.
Trustee Hamilton.
Meeting is adjourned. Good night.